We have a full house here, so call the meeting to order. Peter, if you would do the roll call.
Sure. Rickard?
Here.
Epstein?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Thornburg here. And O'Grady absent.
Any announcements, Eric?
Just the usual announcement for everyone that we're being fed live over the internet at KMPUD.com. If anyone has any comments or questions, they can email me at echristison@KMPUD.com.
Okay. Any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar?
I'd like to pull the minutes.
Pull the minutes, okay. Any other corrections? Okay, we'll move on to comments from the audience on non-agenda items.
Yes.
Bertrand.
Okay. So, after some misleading statement in the snow removal staff report in the May 11 meeting packet, I sent an email that KMA asked to be read into the record, and that email to become a part of the official minute for May 11 meeting, and there's under the snow removal agendized topic. During that meeting, the general manager acknowledged that the email would be put into the minute. It's visible on the meeting video at 1 hour and 43 minutes. But the email has not been attached to the minute, and clerk of the board now tells me it was read aloud during the meeting, which is not true. KMA is asking again the email to be read into the record and attached to the May 11th minute. The other comment I'd like to make is that KMPUD need to work for greater transparency. Questions asked are often not responded to. Phone calls are not returned. Data is shared in an obscuring layout, while easy and meaningful ones are not offered. Take an example of the snow removal driveway spreadsheet that's included in the meeting packet of today. So I did spend some time to create an easy-to-grasp graph of this data, but the staff refused to add them in the packet. Staff need to step up its communication for greater transparency. And I conclude by saying, fear not, I've decided to run for a board director seat at the next election so I can help improving communication and transparency.
Any questions on that? Okay, any other comments from the audience? Okay, we'll go to the adoption of the consent calendar with the regular board meeting minutes removed. So we'll be approving the current consent for claims and the receivable shutoffs. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then we'll bring the regular board meeting minutes of May 11th forward for separate discussion.
Yeah, so this has to do with the, it's on page 10 of the packet, where it says the board adopted the following changes to future employees' retirement health insurance benefits. I'm pretty sure we adopted that, but it should be noted that we said pending a review of whether or not we're able to adopt it.
Yes.
In other words, I myself am not entirely sure, at least I wasn't then,
Right.
that we would be able to make that change.
Yeah, and it applied to both of those, that they would be contingent on CalPERS.
Yeah, so I just like that to be
Good catch.
Yeah.
added.
And I think it applies to both, Eric, right? It applies to both the 180 and the retiree. I think
I guess it would, yeah.
So we'll make
Yeah,
that.
that's just because in the past when we've explored this, we didn't explore these specific things.
Right.
But when we explored things, we were consistently said either you can't change it or it'll be very expensive to change. So I just,
Yeah.
Just to be clear, the pending is only for the future.
it's for
the
both,
retiree health benefits
for
and-
future employees' health insurance and future employees' retirement health insurance benefits. Both those last items
Okay.
is just pending
Just, okay.
CalPERS approval.
CalPERS approval, yeah.
Got it.
Okay, with that change, do I hear a motion to approve the meeting minutes of May 11th?
Sure. So moved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain since I didn't attend the meeting.
Right.
And agenda item 8, items for board action. Kelly with their one slide.
I have lots of pages, it's not a lot of slides. Good morning.
Barney?
So we'll start with the balance sheet on page 24. The only note I had on the balance sheet for April was that total operating cash, when netted with the cushion of credit variance, brought our total variance for operating cash to $418,000 rather than the $1 million it was showing in the total operating line. So just important to note that we consider the cushion of credit operating cash, so that needs to be netted together. Other than that, I didn't have any additional notes on the balance sheet for April.
Unless you want to know what finally happened
Oh.
on Friday.
PG&E finally cashed our check.
Six
the-
months later,
for
6
the
months plus.
ITCC tax. So I feel like we're finally done with at least that part of PG&E. So
They run a real efficient operation.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
evident.
I think it took them 6 months to find it, to be honest with you.
So yes. Are there any questions then on the balance sheet? Okay.
Sorry, I thought you didn't
Yeah, I was going to, but you got to it before I could. Stole my thunder. Moving on to the revenue account operating cash breakout. Again, this is something that I'm going to continue to include in the financials, just so we can see on a month-to-month basis where revenue cash stands for each of the different departments. So you can see currently water is the only one showing a negative balance, but I expect snow removal and wastewater at least to also go negative. So, and employee housing, yes, sorry. Any questions on the revenue account? Okay. Moving on to the income statement, combined income statement. Operating revenues for April were up by $47,000. Year-to-date revenues are up by $705,000. But remember, we need to take into account that $100,000 of that is from the property tax revenue allocation for electric. And the reason why that's an anomaly is because previously all property tax revenues were considered a non-operating cash item. They're usually not in the operating revenue. But when we got our okay from Russ to include property tax revenues for electric in operating revenues, so that we didn't have to do this back and forth adjustment when we do our Form 7, it will now be budgeted to be in the operating revenues for what we might have to allocate to electric in next year's budget. It is not fixed on the version of the budget that you received. Eric pointed out that I needed to make that change, so I just...
Are you going to put all property taxes now up there? Or
No, just electric. Just electric.
So it'd be property taxes, electric.
Right.
Okay.
Year-to-date total operating is up from plan by $465,000. And year-to-date total net income is up from plan by $514,000. So at this point, we had expected to be still operating at a loss of $102,000, and we're actually working with some income at $411,000. So
When do we know about Gatsby 68 again?
Olga's got the reports. She's got to get them back to me. She's got to have her manager look at them. Not her manager, one of the managers that works for her, to see if they've changed the way they've done their assumptions for this year. I did get the Gatsby 75 back, but she hasn't had a chance to look at it yet to see what we think it might be.
So the Gatsby 75 that's the 210,000 we talked about.
Right, that's the 210,000,
And so that's going to hit this as a
it'll hit
below the line expense.
It'll see, yeah, it's gonna be in that Gatsby. I'm gonna change that line to say Gatsby 68/75, and that's where those will live, because they are expenses that show up on our P&L, but they don't affect our cash. It's something that we have to report, but it's not a. Thank God, it's not a cash item. So.
Is it positive or negative this year? I can't tell from the conversation.
Oh, for Gatsby 75, it's a negative.
Negative this year?
It's an expense of $210,000. And we also have to report an OPEB, net OPEB liability of $1.3 million just for the Gatsby 75 stuff. That's not including the Gatsby 68 stuff. So.
Which goes to what came out of the closed session last board meeting, as we're looking at other options to reduce that liability for future hires.
I did include in the Finance Committee packet a staff report and the reports from Gatsby 75. If you'd like, Bob, I'm happy to forward those to you.
Well, I know where to find them. I'll
Okay.
go and read them.
Okay.
Thank you. The $1 million one, is that a P&L item?
That's a balance sheet item.
Just balance sheet.
Mhm.
Okay.
Moving on to general fund on page 28. You'll note the overage in operations and maintenance, and this includes $7,000 in miscellaneous shop supplies and $6,800 for the general manager training that's coming up, and that's the second half of that training. We had posted the first half a few months ago. Moving on to water on page 31 of your packet. Year-to-date operating revenues from water are up from plan by $4,500, and year-to-date total operating for water is up from plan by $41,000, but still, again, operating at a loss of $71,000. Moving on to wastewater on page 32. Operating revenues year-to-date are up from plan by $54,000. You'll notice an overage in operations and maintenance, and that includes $11,600 in high core repairs. And year-to-date total operating for water is up from plan by $143,000, but again, still operating at a loss of $151,000. Moving on to electric on page 34. Operating revenues are up from plan by $432,000. Year-to-date total operating is up from plan by $329,000. And so electric, with all the snow, is having a good, or had a good year. Now, thank God the snow is melting, finally. We'll move on to snow removal on page 36. You'll notice that there was an overage in operations and maintenance, and that included $5,700 in miscellaneous trackless repair parts. So year-to-date total operating for snow removal is down from plan by $91,000. Moving on to propane on page 37. Year-to-date operating revenues are up from plan by $199,000. There is an overage in operations and maintenance, and that includes $3,042 in service parts for the water bath. And year-to-date total operating for propane is up from plan by $71,000. And that is all I have on income statements. Any questions? Okay. I didn't have any notes on the comparisons from this year to last year, but I will just say that on the income statement comparison, year-to-date total operating, we are better than last year by $144,000. So even considering, all of the extra expense that had to come through, we're still better than last year.
So I've got another question about GASB 6875. I know it affects how we do the tier ratios, right? Or certain of the ratios. So that's unfortunate to the extent that they're negative. And we don't know whether 68 is going to be positive or negative this year. Does including that in our income statement, will that affect rate studies?
I don't
Yes.
see how,
It
it's
has
on the
to,
P&L, yeah.
I mean, to the portion that is for those particular utilities, yes.
Yeah.
Really, what will cover that is property tax revenues. That's what we've pledged, property tax revenues to cover our tier ratio. So,
No, I know, but I'm well aware that we're going to have to look at water and wastewater again, and just piling on more expense, which, justified or not, I can't tell if it's justifiable or not. It's just that it's a requirement. It's just another burden.
Thankfully, it's not considered an operating expense, so it doesn't affect our O tier ratio, but
Right.
it does affect, some of the other 4 or 3 that we have to meet. And we never went to my slide,
Your one
the one slide.
Could we see it now, please?
Yes, there's my income statement. That's all I have for April financials. Are there any questions for April? Okay.
Are you going to go into the cash waterfall?
I was going to go to May preliminaries first
Got it.
on page 41. Operating revenues for May were up from plan by $21,000, and considering how cold it was and that we had 2 feet of snow in May, that directly is related to that. You can see that most of the overage came in residential. Obviously, the resort was closed, so there's when it snows here late, that's where we make our overages, is in residential. And so year-to-date, total operating revenues through May are up from plan by $726,000. Any questions on May preliminaries? Okay. Moving on to cash flow. So again, we've discussed that the cash flow for the following years is not as accurate towards the end of the year, so I'm going to focus just on the end of this year because we know we have a new budget that's coming through, and this is not updated with the new budget numbers. Total operating for May came in at $3.8 million, and you'll notice that I've now included the LAIF balance as part of our operating cash. We were, in the Finance Committee meeting, we were discussing investment opportunities for any excess cash that we had for the district, and we have this LAIF account, and because we're not earning any interest on our cushion of credit anymore because we can't deposit there, it was decided that we would use the LAIF account to earn whatever interest we could on cash that we weren't using immediately. It's pretty easy to transfer money to and from. It's a same day transaction, so we decided to move, at this point, $1 million into the LAIF account and earn what interest we could on it. And if we need it, we can, move it back over into our Bank of the West accounts and be able to use the money very easily. It's not like we put it there and it has to stay there. So
Okay. I'll admit I don't know what that stands for.
LAIF,
Local Area-
Agency Investment Fund.
It's managed by the state treasurer. So
Oh,
it's-
okay.
I can send you the rates. I think they're like, what are they?
they're about the 3-year treasury
Yeah.
rate is what they,
Oh, well,
or
that's
2-year
good.
treasury rate is
Uh-huh.
what they sit on.
That's a good deal.
So
And that is, when we get to it later on about the investment policy, finance did recommend LAIF as
Yes.
who we generically use because they satisfy all the requirements of the state.
We've used it in the past.
We had an account that predated me here,
Yeah.
so absolutely.
yeah, it was set
we
up
still
in
have it.
'85. That was the original revenue account that the
Right.
district used,
Right.
and then we went to different bank accounts, and we always kept that open, and so it was a good thing. We could just transfer money right back into it.
Yeah.
And so we are better than planned by $244,000 through May, and I expect in June to stay right about the same variance based on the current budget numbers.
Yeah, I've got a question, but it's
Sure.
actually in the budget, not here.
Okay.
I forgot.
Any other questions on cash flow then? Okay, moving on to budget variances. There were some updates to the known budget variances. Snow removal wages and benefits, year-to-date, are over plan by $55,000. We've updated the general manager training. The total for that is $13,725, and that's just because the decision to send the general manager to those trainings was made after we did the budget. So,
And I will add that there was never a line previously for training. It was a blank line. So in this budget and the sheets behind what you see, there is a line for training in each of the respective departments now. So so basically all training we've done this year is a known variance because it wasn't budgeted. So we've actually added that in.
also, we've added the miscellaneous snow removal equipment repairs are up to $16,000. Miscellaneous shop supplies at $7,000. The high core repairs at $11,600, and the propane water bath service parts at $3,042. And that is all I have on financials.
Can you remind me the switch station accrued costs? Do we amortize that over time, or is that a one-time expense?
No, that was expensed. It was a one-time expense.
Oh, good.
When we
That's my first choice. So
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, no, when we hashed everything out with PG&E and decided not to build the switch station,
Uh-huh.
those costs that we had accrued for that had to be expensed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's great.
And so even with all those, extra costs from that, electric's still performing better than budget, so.
Yeah.
Good. Any question on the finances as reported? With that, we'll move on to the draft 2019-2020 budget.
So we went through this pretty thoroughly in the Finance Committee meeting. I don't know if you just want me to run through highlights or if you just want to ask me questions on, the...
I think since this is the 5th time we've had it, I think probably questions is most productive at this point. And I think
I'll just. I mean, I realized partly because of the fire stuff that Eric and I have been working on, I didn't understand what went into G&A, and it is $1.7 million. So Kelly was kind enough to send me the detail on that, and I was looking for cost savings. I was looking for where can we cut that, and it all looks to me actually be very reasonable, and I don't know where in the world we would.
Just board salaries.
Board salaries could be cut. So I do have a question when we get to the cash flow part of it, but I don't have questions on the. I mean, everything's been answered for me on the budget. I'll just note that the bottom line is not that dissimilar to this year, budget-wise. I mean, overall loss of around $400,000, including depreciation and so.
But I assume this includes the latest snow removal costs that we, okay.
It does.
All right.
Is that your final question?
Yeah, no, I don't.
I mean, if you want to just go ahead and ask me the question on the cash flow.
It's on. It has to do with December 19. It's not the cash flow. I'm sorry. It's page 61 of the packet. It's the
Okay.
consolidated balance sheets, and that's December 19 is of course our low for the year of cash operating, which is $1 million or so. But I didn't understand why accounts payable jumps to $1.6 million. It's about $500,000 more than other times, and I don't think I saw that happening in other years.
Just the accounts payable line?
Excuse me, accounts receivable. Accounts payable doesn't jump. So accounts receivable, which is, almost as good as cash, but it's not quite.
61.
It's $1.6 million. I was just wondering why the jump and why that. I mean, why it's assuming that somehow we're
check.
not being paid. Because if we were paid, right, it'd be up in cash
Right.
rather than in receivables. So that was my only question.
Okay, I'll have to look at the details of the formula in there to be able to answer your question more thoroughly, but
I just thought it
That
might
is
improve
the start of the snow season, so that's, there's a large change in revenue, right? That happens the month before.
the total revenues from the month before are they're only $944,000, so I can't see why receivables would go up to 1.6. So I do need to check a formula in there to make sure that there's not something that was left over from last year.
Okay. Thanks. That was all I had.
Can you remind me, does PCS have a budgeting module that's usable, or this is all spreadsheets?
This is all spreadsheets. PCS does have a budgeting module, but it's more like they just add a percentage and you hit a button. It's not robust enough for what we need to do between all of the funds and
okay,
things
that's
like
what
that.
I remember now.
I wish it was.
But we are proposing in this budget to add their PO module, the purchase order module.
So we'll finally have electronic PO tracking.
Oh.
Something that it's something new that they've come out with, and we had one of the PCS reps out a couple weeks ago, and I asked if they had anything for that, and they do, and apparently, it's something that's well received through all of their other clients. So,
since it's coming up right now, I just mentioned, they do have their annual meeting. And I just feel that there's probably some value of considering going, because if nothing else, you meet all the other tens of users.
Actually, since they've
Is that in Iowa?
It's in Iowa.
they've
Illinois?
No, Iowa.
So you could also attend the caucuses.
yeah, I don't think that the meeting is in Iowa though.
No, it is big.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's in Denison.
It's
is
at their
it?
world
In
headquarters.
Iowa.
Oh,
Yeah.
not Idaho.
No, not Idaho. No, we could kill two birds with one stone.
But PCS has merged with another company, so they actually have 166 different utilities now. That
Did they buy? Were they bought, or did they buy?
I think that they were bought, but everything is like staying the same. But I can send you the information with it. But they've got a lot more utilities now, like through the whole country that they merged with. So I expect to see a lot more stuff coming from them now that they've got so many utilities that they work with.
Right. Okay.
Okay, any other questions on the draft budget?
Just,
Yes,
ignorance,
yes, Frank.
but, on amortization, why does it go up over the 2019 goes from 220 to 434? So on page 60. then it flattens out for the rest of the time?
Because this year we started amortizing the PG&E one-time cost of ownership, and that didn't start until the middle of this year. So that includes all of the upcoming years.
All right, so it's straight line.
Mm-hmm.
It's 35 years, right?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Any action we need to take today on this?
I would just ask that any, more questions or comments, anything like that that you might see going through this, if you could get those to me within the next couple of weeks, that way I can get the final put together and get that out to you actually before the board packet goes out so that you have time to really go through it thoroughly since we'll be approving it at the July meeting. I'd like to get it out to you at least, a week or so before the board meeting.
Okay.
Good, then we'll move on to item 8C.
Did you want to go over capital at all?
I would appreciate it.
Since
Yes, we
that's-
should,
since-
thank you.
It's okay. I just,
You want me to
I
pick it up?
no,
Okay.
you're free. since that's more or less
That was
mine
an
and Rick's
excellent
baby.
slide, Kelly, thank you.
So not a whole lot of changes to this from the last time. Last year we moved everything that wasn't a priority one down to a below the line, and then only talked about the priority ones in terms of being in the budget. There was some confusion about that, so I've just added back in the priorities 2, 3, 4, and 5 so everybody can see them. However, all we're budgeting for this year is priority one items. That's what Kelly's including. What I did add at the bottom of each line was priority one projects only, so you can actually see them, as well as on the summary page, so you have that information for just the priority ones. Now, that being said, as we know from year to year, what's a priority two will next year become generically a priority one, assuming approval by the board. But that's just basically where they sit and where they've sat for the last 2 years. So those are back in. Any questions on capital?
Can you just walk me through the wastewater treatment plant and the overall strategy and how that relates?
Sure. Yeah, so a couple pieces to that. So I'll start and I'll probably bounce around. But
Okay.
we have the wastewater treatment plant study, which tells us basically here's what you need to do over the next 5 years. I've taken that and expanded it to 6 years just because of the level of cost over 5 years. As we do the rate study, which I will, as soon as it's adopted in the board, and it is included, it's $35,000 for water and $35,000 for wastewater is what we've included in the budget. It's an operational cost, not a capital cost, but it is in the budget. To do a 218 study, go through the whole process, the noticing, the hearing, the balloting. That will consider those projects over those 6 years. But what I'm doing is I've been talking to the state, and I've been talking to RUS about financing. We're not going to get any grants. We'll still apply for them, but we're not a disadvantaged community, a DAC, so in all likelihood we will not get them. But we're working on the loan. So when they consider the rate study, they're going to assume an indebtedness, debt service for these next 6 years of projects. And so that will be considered in the rate study, and that's how we're dealing with the wastewater feasibility study critical projects.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is this year with this coming year with the roof is the big one that we're working on. I finalized my review of the plans on those Thursday. So those are ready with my changes, the engineer will complete those and they'll be ready, assuming the board adopts the budget, we'll be ready to advertise for bid in July and hit the ground running on that with a 60-day construction window.
And to complete it before the fall snows?
Yes. That's why I want to hit it. That's why I want to, as soon as the budget's adopted on Friday, that Monday we'll be advertising, or the very next time I can get in the paper, it'll be advertised for the 30-day requirement.
Okay. And when do the membranes, what are we assuming for the lifetime of the membranes? And
So the operations committee decided to put them out as needing replacement in 2022-23.
And they'll be how old then?
They were bought, I think they'll be, will they be 11 years at that point?
Yeah, there's 6 years this year, so
Yeah.
that's fairly optimistic.
Right.
Realistically, if we can get a rate increase and we can build up some kind of a reserve fund for the membranes, I'd feel more comfortable. I mean, it'd be great if that lasts that long, but
Right, but
historically
there are
they
very
haven't.
long lead times, so if they don't,
Right, exactly.
we're taking a large risk. Or-
We
Exactly.
are budgeting to have an expert come out and review them and look at them and also review their current performance to give their expert opinion
Okay.
on their longevity. And that we included that membrane review for $10,000 in the capital budget.
And we're going to have somebody from Coke come out? Is that the plan or no?
Don't know, but we're going to have somebody who's
Don't
an
know.
expert come out and look. Because Coke might be a little biased in terms of wanting to sell us more, but they also know their membranes pretty well. But we may retain it.
We've had the best luck with their membranes.
We may
That's
retain
what I
a
look at.
specialist,
Yeah.
depending on who we can find out there.
Well, I'm glad to see that at least we're addressing it within a 5-year time frame, whereas before we weren't at all.
Mhm.
I don't think we were being totally unrealistic. We're moving in the right direction, I think, but everything makes me nervous with regards to wastewater. And when we prioritize the cap replacement projects, I see projects that I like, but I don't know if we should put some of the wastewater projects ahead of them. You know, like, for example, spending $100,000 for a shed over the propane tanks, which would have been helpful this year because it was an unusual year and there's a safety issue, but normally it's not necessary. Whereas I'm real nervous about some of the instrumentation in the treatment plant because it's so contaminated. You know, we decided to put those John Deere generators in there so we could go offline from mountain utilities.
Right.
And in the short term, we saved a lot of money doing that.
Yeah. and
But in the long term, now it contaminated
Right.
the equipment. So now we're paying for it.
Okay. I'd also send Derek some ideas in terms of the SCADA, a
Yes.
distributed SCADA system.
Yeah, and he's been reviewing those, and I haven't followed up with him to see how far he's gotten, but yes, he's been looking at that.
Okay. I guess the thing I'm looking for is to understand what we're spreading things out and what risks are we trying to manage in spreading them out and looking at an alternative that wouldn't spread it out as much. Just to understand what the trade-offs we're making and what risks we're doing.
In the applications for loans, I'm putting it all together as one project.
Right.
Given our construction window, the feasibility of doing it in 1 year is not likely, but
Right.
RUS historically on the projects I've done with them have been willing to have multi-year projects and willing to bundle, for lack of a better word, a project as long as it's all related to the same thing. So, you know, there's been 40 years of deferred maintenance on the wastewater plant, and we're finally taking a look at it, and it's a
Yeah,
little
it's just
scary.
whether doing it in 5
Peter's
years
right.
as opposed to 3 is
Yeah.
is that a risk, and how are we mitigating
And I
it?
think what you'll see when we start doing the rate study, the board will have to make a decision on what if we want it to be more aggressive, what does that mean in terms of rates?
Right.
I mean, if you review the Stantec study, what they proposed was more aggressive
Right.
than what we're proposing to do this year. We're already, by their schedule, we're already a year behind.
Right.
So,
Regarding the propane tank, that's a point from
yeah.
Peter. If we're able to hire the snow removal staff that we have and that we're planning, and that frees up the utility staff to do more utility work, including, as I understand it, removal of snow from around the equipment, would that help mitigate the need for this $100,000 expenditure at the tanks a bit? I mean,
Possibly. I think there's some other issues that it will mitigate that expose the district to significant liability if we don't mitigate them.
location of those valves, for example.
I think it would expose the district to other liabilities.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess the question with propane is we don't, to raise the rates, we don't need a Prop 218.
That is correct.
And I think that if you're going to make these kind of expenditures, like we've spent how much have we spent in the last 2 years for the valving? And
85.
maybe, I know we try to run it as a break-even enterprise, but maybe we should look at in raising those rates to cover things like this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to start building a reserve because there are
Yeah,
known costs that
right.
are coming in relative to propane, but pending what happens with ongoing litigation,
I know
may
I understand
completely
what you're
change
saying,
what we
yeah.
decide to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, that affects our decision on whether to put a roof on it too, even.
Mhm.
I know, I don't like putting our staff at risk, obviously. And that's why I look at a project like that, which I'm basically in favor of, but it's just the priority. What's going to break first?
Yeah,
You know,
I
it's a
think-
gamble.
I think the thing to keep in mind is, and I think you're conflating two issues here, propane is supposed to be a standalone. Wastewater is supposed to be a
Well,
standalone.
I know,
So
ideally
what we do
all
in
of them are,
wastewater
yeah.
should have zero effect on what we do in propane. It
Yeah.
should. In theory, they should be their
Right,
own
I understand
standalone instead
Well,
of
so
us.
should electricity.
Except for electricity is funding all the others through interfund loans.
Well, I know, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And,
So I just want to make sure we're not conflating two issues.
Maybe we could agree to review the capital plan, because this work, this priority one, would be done, a lot of it would be done not this summer, but next summer. Or,
Right.
We're going to try
And-
to get it done this summer, aren't we?
And simply because it's budgeted doesn't mean the board has to authorize
Yeah.
proceeding with it either.
Right.
There is that as well to consider. But Peter makes a good point. We should revisit propane, but since so many balls are in the air right now,
well, that's
I'm doing what I think is the bare minimum for satisfactory life and safety protection of my employees.
so what I'm just saying is after we know what happens with the litigation, after we have more information from Russ, perhaps after we have this rate study, we can do another review.
Right.
I mean, specifically review this capital plan in, I don't know, 6 months, 4 months, beginning of Q3. I don't know when, what the right thing is, but
We won't be building it this summer. We have to have the engineering done on it because it's an explosion hazard. It requires a structural engineer. We've already met with the engineer who will be as a structural engineering consultant. I don't see in any, unless we have a really dry fall, I don't see in any way that this would proceed. But if we have a really dry fall, then we could bring that back to the board as an accelerated project. But at this time, I was anticipating design is done this year, or this summer, and then we're ready to hit the ground running as soon as snow melts next year. And we have two projects that are part of the engineering. So it's the powerhouse backside as well as the in terms of the roof designs. So we're lumping those into one
anyways,
engineering contract.
if we approve this now, we're not locking ourselves into 6 years of wastewater and so on. We could obviously modify it. That's all.
Absolutely. Oh,
All
absolutely.
I'm saying,
Yeah, absolutely.
as we know more.
Yeah, it's at the pleasure of the board. Any of these larger projects, even if they're budgeted, still do come back to the board for issuance of notice of awards and notices to proceed.
I apologize for circling back on this, but obviously I have no request or interest in the details of your legal claim, but I'm thinking in terms of some of the other entities that we run, and has there an allowance been made for additional legal costs above your current run rate in the operating budget in anticipation of things that might be out there on the horizon for a legal claim?
No, it's through our insurance is how it's covered, and our insurance is a budgeted item. And it's based on our revenue, not based on liability or history generically.
Okay, so just to be clear, in my experience, there's an insurance legal aspect, and then there's an oversight legal aspect on the insurance in order to protect the overall interests of the district. So there might be additional costs.
It's a little bit different for us because it's a joint power with other utilities,
Uh-huh.
and so that's why it's not a normal insurance pool that you would be familiar with. It's a public entity insurance pool. It's calculated very differently based on revenue.
I think the question is, do we anticipate higher legal costs? And the answer is that we think we've properly budgeted.
Yes, I think they're properly budgeted for
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on the capital improvement plan? Okay, and I guess the same comment, if any questions, get them to you before the next meeting in time.
Feel very comfortable with the iteration.
Yeah.
We're getting down to the nitty gritty, and we've refined as we've gone through various committees and so. But 8C is a new one.
Yes,
That came out of IT.
good. We will move on to 8C, which is the Windows 7 and computer upgrades.
So this is a new item. It is included in the budget. It is $8,000 for both replacement of obsolete computers that can't handle a Windows 7 to 10 upgrade, as well as upgrading those computers that can handle it. So estimate was at $8,000 to upgrade and replace computers, as you can see from the various departments wherein they reside. It is a security issue, as was made clear by our consultant, Stephen King. So this is an addition to the budget, so I wanted everyone to know that this was added in separately from just covering in the budget since it came out of IT. Anything you want to add to that, Bob, or does that cover the 30,000 foot?
Okay, moving on to item 8D, the trackless financing.
Sure. So in April, the board gave direction that I was to secure the loan funding and work with the treasurer to pick the one that was the best option. Standish and I picked option 3. Originally was the Bank of the West at 5.85%. We since then shopped around a little bit through Schaefer Equipment and found Wells Fargo would do it at 3.88. It requires an authorizing resolution, not a revolution. That's I've been listening to the French Revolution podcast, The Truth About the French Revolution, so I apologize about that. But anyway, so it requires this authorizing resolution. It's standard language. Shanahan has looked at it and is issuing the opinion of council, which is another required document. And any questions?
This is Resolution 1901.
This is 1902.
1902.
Yeah, it's paid. It starts on page 78.
Okay.
Yeah, I move that we adopt resolution 1902.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Move on to item 8E, employee housing financing.
So this is resolution 1901, which is on page 99. This just reaffirms our authorized signatories, and basically the board adopts that they want to proceed with this loan. It's what we've done in the past with Bank of the West. It's very similar to 1902, which we just adopted, but it's for the purchase of the housing in Sun Meadows 3-4.
Unless we're going to cover it later, we were originally looking at 2 units.
That is correct.
So if we find another one, it would be a separate loan.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. And if this loan doesn't close by the close of escrow, we will be using the line of credit. Since the loans with Bank of the West and the mortgages with Bank of the West, or the line of credits with Bank of the West and the mortgages with Bank of the West, it's a very simple thing for us to do. We've been assured by Jim Neal. We anticipate they'll probably hit about the same time. And yes, when we're in negotiations on a second unit, but we have not reached a satisfactory resolution from my or Rick's perspective on those negotiations as of yet. So we're still looking and we're still negotiating. The person we're negotiating with is gone until early July, Rick, and then we'll resume negotiations with them. But that unit is a desirable unit for us for multiple reasons. But that would be we would come back with a 1903 or whatever it might be.
Right.
20, I guess it'd be 20. So.
Okay. I move we adopt 1901.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. We'll move on to item 8F, reserve guidelines.
So the finance, backing up quite a few steps, and I apologize for the repetitiveness for Eric, but Kelly and I attended a was it CSDA, SDRMA joint finance all-day seminar down in Florham Perkins in Sacramento. And we learned about a lot of things that some special districts are required to do and need to be doing. And so we brought those back to Finance Committee, and over the course of a few months, we've been working through multiple policies. We also have two others that are still in the works, or actually one other that's still in the works that's being worked on. GASB 75 was completed. We did our audit on that. Kelly was able to get a good deal through the school, California School Association. So we satisfied one of the five, but this is three more of the five that we've been working on. This is the capital reserve policy. This was worked on, it was a subcommittee of Standish, Eric, and myself, and then reviewed by Finance and modified. And this goes to the LAIF question a little bit, or sorry, the LAIF question is a different one. This goes to how, as we budget, as we go forward in our budgeting process, this is an important document for our rate consultant to have in determining, okay, you say you want to have 25% reserves in these respective capital operations. What does that look like in terms of what your rates need to be? So this is an important document to have prior to going to the rate study, and Finance Committee recommends adoption.
But the reserves are in aggregate, it's not per department.
The capital reserve is in aggregate, just because it's not realistic to do it by department right now. What the policy suggests is that we will strive at some point to make it by department.
Yes.
Now, obviously, we do already have certain ones by department: snow removal and fire.
Right.
But
Well, all of our cash is by department. I mean, it has to be.
well, the cash exists by department, but this goal is
Right.
to be more overall rather than by department. We would like to strive to having it 25% of the next 5 years of expenditure by department, but that's not realistic today.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Eric, is that this is a goal, and the district will ultimately start working towards this to basically try and right the ships.
Okay, any questions on policy statement number 695? Not, do I hear a motion to adopt?
I'll move to adopt since it's so well drafted.
Eric was the main author on that one.
So I'm not sure I understand this completely, but we're on page 108. It says
You're on a different policy on 108.
Oh, really?
Yep.
That's investment.
That's the next one, though. But yeah, two
The
different
manager
policies.
is different than the finance committee. That's what you're saying.
You're looking at a different policy. We're on the capital and operating reserve policy. You're on to
What
the
page?
investment policy.
What page? It's 102.
102
sorry,
through 105.
I jumped ahead.
That's okay.
We want to get out of here too.
Well, okay, I'll hold my question till we get there.
Okay, I have a motion.
Well, do you have a question on this one?
Well, basically, in reading through these policies, it seems like the board is delegating responsibility to the finance committee and the manager, and it doesn't say anything about what about these decisions that are investment decisions are going to be made subject to board approval.
There's nothing in
Are
the
we
current policy
abrogating
we're
our-
talking about
Okay.
that says that. Let's save that for the next one,
Okay,
and I can
okay,
answer that one.
okay.
But yeah, there is, to answer your question, yes, it is subject to board approval, but this one doesn't have any of that language in it.
Yeah, what this one does, it just, what the reserve policy just suggests is targets for how much we want in reserves, what the appropriate uses are, sources of those reserves are, and what the appropriate uses are. That's really what it does. So the most important thing is that we're aiming for 25% of annual revenues, of annual expenditures to be our operating cash reserves. And that's by department. And then on capital, it's looking at our approved 5-year plan and targeting 25% of that dollar amount to be in our capital reserve account in aggregate. So that's essentially
Yeah, I
the
didn't
most
understand
important
it was
thing.
two separate policies.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded to approve policy statement 695. All in favor?
Aye.
Move on to 8G, the investment guidelines.
So this is what Peter was looking at. I would just refer you to pages 112 and 113 that require board approval and review, quarterly review of these policies. We're required to invest a certain way as a California special district. That's the bottom line. This satisfies having the policy of how we invest. How we invest is dictated by the state, and this policy satisfies the how of it and the what. Basically, the LAIF account that Kelly reports on is going to be the vehicle we use, is the LAIF account, because the state treasurer is in full compliance, obviously, because they're also in the enforcement arm. So if we stick with LAIF, there's really no issue for us in terms of compliance. It's the simplest one-stop shop. We already had the account, and we've transferred the $1 million over to it now, and we're earning 2-year treasury on it. And it also meets the goals of the investment policy. I'd love to have the problem that we have more money than we want to put in LAIF, and we want to start looking at other investment vehicles. I don't see that happening anytime in the near term, but it's always at the discretion of the Finance Committee and the board ultimately.
So if Russ were to open up the account that we had before,
Cushion of credit, sure.
Could we go into that again?
I would have to confirm that it satisfies all the requirements of the policy, but I would be shocked if it didn't.
Okay. Any questions on the investment policy? Policy statement 380.
Peter, does that?
That answers my questions. I
There's a lot
didn't
of
read
pages.
every line of this. It just got what paragraph caught
I've
my
gone through it
attention.
so much that I'm able to get right to
Okay.
answer your question, so no problem at all. It's a lot to digest. I get it.
Do I have a motion to approve policy statement 380?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
And continuing with our policies, we have AB 1234 reimbursement policy.
We did have an old policy adopted in '86. It was no longer in compliance with the general requirements, and there were a lot of holes in it. For example, our mechanic, we don't have a trailer that can pull a trackless or can load a trackless, and we don't have a vehicle that can haul a trailer with a trackless on it. Our mechanic does. How do we reimburse him for that? I had to make a decision as general manager that I would reimburse him at the federal rate for mileage, and I'd use the Caltrans standard equipment rate for the use of the trailer, which is a daily rate, and that's how we reimburse him. I had to make that because there was no guidelines. So basically, we've adopted the guidelines. This was a product of, and I should give credit to the last one, which was Alan Sapp, Nancy, and who was the third on the investment? Eric, do you recall? Alan Sapp, Nancy, and
Was it
Mark Duvall. Yeah. So they're the ones who worked on the other one, so I want to give them full credit for helping us with that. This one was an effort of Jack Longinati and myself getting this done. We reviewed quite a few. Again, reviewed by Finance Committee, which recommends adoption.
Any questions on policy 330?
I have a minor nit on rental cars. I mean, it might be one that's snow-worthy. I mean, if the only available vehicle that's four-wheel drive is not intermediate, I wouldn't want to tell them to use a two-wheel drive.
No, that's why I like a second set of eyes on this stuff. That's great. I think that's my recommended language, unless you have some, would be all rentals must be an intermediate-sized car or smaller, unless 3 or more people are traveling, or unless it is needed for weather
Unless
conditions.
a four-wheel drive is needed.
Unless a
for weather
four-wheel drive is
conditions.
needed.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll make that edit.
Okay, with the change noted, do I have a motion to approve policy statement 330?
Yeah, so moved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
And I see Rick approaching the table, so we will We'll talk about self-contained breathing apparatus. Notice of award.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As the board is aware, we received a FEMA grant for the purchase of self-contained breathing apparatuses, SCBA's, and the district staff has gone through the process to solicit bids for air packs, and we received 2 bids on May 30th, and we discovered that the lowest responsible bidder was Ellen Curtis and Sons, with a bid of $65,208. So therefore, staff's recommendation is to award the bid to Ellen Curtis and Sons, and also notice to proceed with Ellen Curtis and Sons. And this report's on page 117 of the board packet.
As long as we pay our 5%, then the grant will pay the rest.
Any questions on the award and the action? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to move that we accept the bid of Ellen Curtis and Sons for the SCBA equipment.
10 packs. There's 10 of them.
10 packs, 10 base pieces.
Yes.
And direct staff to issue the notice of award and notice to proceed.
Pardon? Just a second.
Sorry, I asked before. Could you describe a bit what is a SCBA?
It's the self-contained breathing apparatus, as you can see in the picture here. It's what the firefighters wear when they go into a ideal
It's for the fire.
environment.
Okay, and it's 10 of them that you are talking about? Or? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Rick, just remind me, we had planned on using contributed monies for this originally, and that money will now be used for...
The money still will remain in the reserve account
Okay.
for the fire department to be used for firefighting equipment as so deemed by the department and board direction.
So,
Okay, I'd like to move that we accept the bid and notify staff to,
Issue the notice of award and notice to proceed.
yes, those 2 things.
do I have a second on those 2 things?
Pete, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have direction, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Good news.
Congratulations again on the grant.
Breathe in good health.
Okay, moving to item 8J, board election. Preparation of the board election on November 5, 2019. Jess?
All right, so starting on page 120 of your packet is all the election information. The district will be having a general election on November 5th, along with the California State General Election. There's 2 seats up, Standish and Jeff. Seat number 1 is Jeff, and seat number 2 is Standish. So the Elections Code requires that the board make a few decisions regarding the election and to pass a resolution stating those decisions. So you need to decide if the Alpine County Clerk will combine our election notice with other districts, that's Markleyville Water District and Bear Valley Utility District, or issue an individual notice. So you'll need to decide the length of the candidate statements and where they pay for publication. Each candidate must declare candidacy between July 15th and August 9th and publish a statement containing either 200 or 400 words. There's also a $35 cost per candidate paid to the Alpine County Clerk for publication of their statements. And either the district covers that $35 cost or each candidate prepays at the district office. And you need to decide how to determine the winner in the event of a tie. So in past elections, the board has opted to combine the election notice with other districts. Candidate statements were limited to 200 words, and the candidate prepaid the $35 cost at the district office here for the publication of their statements. And in the event of a tie, the general manager drew straws to determine the winner. But you could do anything, really. You can play 5-card stud if you wanted. So staff recommends to pass Resolution 1903, and that is declaring the general district election. So with the passing of that resolution, the district election will be combined with other local districts and the statewide general election. Candidate statements will be limited to 200 words, and the candidate will prepay at the district office for publication of their statements. And in the event of a tie, the general manager will draw straws to determine the winner.
That's what we've always done in the past.
Yeah.
We've actually had to draw straws.
Really?
Yes.
What election did you have to draw straws in?
Oh, God. One was involving Larry Lacey. I think that was like 30 years ago. It's all kind of blurring, but it's happened several times, actually.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah, it was.
I guess that's a good method.
Are these biodegradable straws?
No plastic straws, yeah.
As long as we don't have to use them for drinking, it'll be fine.
Okay, any questions on this before I call for a motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve what's been proposed by Jess. It's worked in the past, and it's pretty straightforward.
Resolution 1903 as proposed. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Jeff.
I'll get that prepared and submit it to the county, and then any candidates that are interested in running, you can come see me, and I'll get you a candidate's packet.
Okay, we have item 8I, which is a power source disclosure. Hello, Brandy.
Do we have performance reporting before that?
Yes, we do. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I went.
I'll be brief on that. So for performance reporting for May, like Kelly mentioned, we did have a cold year, so we had higher than normal use, but still lower than seasonal ski season use. For electric, we had a production of 487,000 kilowatt hours. We did run the powerhouse for the first time all year during May because we had to do our emissions testing. So we had about a day and a half of powerhouse run, which went fine. Our losses, unidentified losses, were 19% for the month, 11% for the year, tracking pretty well with our 12% goal. Taking a look at propane, we sold slightly more than we got delivered, a negative 3% loss for the month, negative 4% loss for the year. On water, we produced 423,000 gallons at our wells. We had unidentified loss or use of 118,000 or 28%. Bringing us to 10% loss for the year with a goal of 15%, so tracking along there.
But why would May suddenly have a large amount of losses? Is there a theory?
My theory is, if you look back at the previous months, we had 4 months running where we had 0 or 1% loss. I suspect that our losses in May were just a catch-up due to tank levels being higher and that sort of thing. That's what I suspect happened there.
Did we use excess water when using the bar screen? Was that?
We did have some excess water. That was mostly captured in the month of April rather than May.
Just curious.
Lastly, wastewater. We are in I&I season. We metered 2.7 million gallons coming into the plant. Of that, water used in the valley was 260,000 gallons. So 2.4 million gallons in our estimation was flow from outside sources into our system, 90%. Just so that we keep an eye on where we came from, 90% is about average for the last 4 years for May. Year to date, though, this year we're at 39%. In 17-18 year-to-date, I&I for wastewater was 50%. 16-17 we were at 63%. And 15-16 we were at 47%. So 39% year-to-date is the best we've done in the last 4 years in wastewater.
Why don't you have a goal on this wastewater?
That
Let's say
was
yeah.
that was a moving target. We had tried to quantify what our goals should be because our losses, or our not losses, but our I&I was so high. We had accepted a tentative goal of before the I&I started getting really bad, but we were looking into what the goal should be, and we had not adopted one for this year.
I had asked that the goal be removed several years ago because we didn't know the cost effectiveness of the target. We didn't have any way of understanding that, and we were also under the impression that a little extra clean water cleaned the membranes and had a beneficial.
That was erroneous.
So since we didn't know how to measure the cost effectiveness, I asked that the goal be removed until we could.
So now you know.
No, I think we're getting closer. This is the first time we've spent money on fixing damages and tried to measure. So I think at the end of this season, we can say this is an estimate of how much I&I we avoided. What was the operating benefit of that? What did it cost to do it? So I think at the end of June, we have the ability to at least analyze 1 year's worth of data and say what's happening.
The other big part of that is last year this board agreed to budget to start repairing manholes, which had never been done before. And we also are budgeting to get our own jetter camera so we can inspect our lines. So, and we're also budgeting to buy smoke testing equipment. So over the next 4 years and plus this current year, we had a goal of here's our 5-year plan to reduce I&I. We weren't going to set a target until we finished those projects and we knew where our problems were. So until we know how many people have their gutters tied illegally into our sewer system and how many offset lines there are and how many manholes are leaking and how many we need to repair, until we have all those things quantified, you can't reduce I&I until you know where the problems are. And so that's a 5-year project that's in our capital plan this year as well as the next going forward.
Will you agree that in principle it's good to have a goal because this is something you can work toward to? I'm not aware that many people have gutter in Kirkwood, do they? Who has
There's a
gutter?
few.
I've got.
I do.
You do, okay.
Maybe it's an East thing. I don't know.
Historically, the only illegal ties that we found were I believe it was Base Camp originally had their roof drain right into the storm sewer, but we caught that years ago.
Yeah, smoke testing is going to reveal to us breaks in the line, separations of joints, spiral cracks, as well as illegal connections, because the smoke will start coming out somewhere, and we're going to know where those illegal connections, if they exist, are, as well as damaged pipe that we need to repair.
But identifying illegal connection of gutter to the system should be pretty easy. I mean, if you inspect the valley, you should find who is actually dumping his gutter water into our system. So it's not complex. I don't understand why it's not done. I mean,
I don't agree because I've got a gutter and a rainwater leader. The rainwater leader goes underground, goes to a pipe.
It might go,
without something like a smoke
it might go
test.
into one of the creeks.
Yeah.
Or the drainage.
Yeah, we don't
without a
perform
smoke test
inspections
or something.
Okay.
How do you know? How do you know?
houses. We
Yeah.
don't do building inspections.
Even
That's the counties.
I wasn't around when it was actually connected. Now I believe I know where it goes. It's not there. But
Yeah.
so clearly this is a problem, and that should be fixed.
But in terms of your question, this is the first year where we could even have an estimate based on costs. I don't know if we're ready yet, but the goal would be the idea would be to have a goal, but based on understanding. And the previous goal was just a swag, so that's why I asked for it to be removed.
I have a question. This goes back to the electric. When we run diesel, we tend to become less efficient. And I know there's been a lot of articles about PG&E possibly shutting off power, and I imagine that would affect us if it's along transmission lines that feeds us. Do we have any sense whether or not they would do that island thing again that would allow us to keep going? Or might we be subject to shutoffs and week-long operation of diesel?
We have a presentation from them. They will be shutting off transmission lines as well, so there is no islanding in that situation. So it's very likely we will be on generators with relative frequency this summer. They're shutting off. They are not just punishing the rural areas now, they will be punishing the cities by shutting off the transmission lines to share the pain.
The good news is the wildfires aren't in winter when our main demand is there.
That's just running the diesel for anything is a sad thing.
That's all I had, unless there's any other questions.
Any other questions? So we'll move on to the power source disclosure.
Yes, this is an annual item for the board. The PUD and all electric retailers are required to disclose to the public and the California Energy Commission the source of their power. And that's done in two ways. We have a power source disclosure document, and then we have a power content label. Both of those come before you for annual approval, so that we can submit them. And basically, just like in years past, our electricity that we sell comes from two sources currently, Powerhouse Generation, and that's classified as other because of the diesel. And then we purchase general power off the grid that's not classified as a type of renewable, so that is listed as unspecified power. In 2018, we generated a very minor amount of power at the powerhouse, rounded to 0%, whereas 100% came off of the grid. So those are included in your packet. The Schedule 1 power procurements and retail sales, and then the actual power content label that we will, if approved, publicize and post on our website. And I am happy to answer any questions.
So PG&E does not disclose to us the mix of source that they use to deliver our energy?
We don't purchase power from PG&E. We just use their lines to receive it. We purchase a mix of energy off of the Cal ISO controlled grid through Shell, and it is we specifically purchase a unspecified mix.
So this is what we legally have to do. We don't have any flexibility on it. We're just approving, following the law.
Yes.
We usually put out an explanation in the newsletter. So is this going to be in the next month's newsletter?
Yes, we would put it in the newsletter.
Tying it into something we're going to discuss later might be useful. And I'd recommend that we just remind people of what our state requirements are. We're currently at 30% renewables, and how we do that and what we paid for that 30%. I think that would be helpful because there's no way anybody's going to read this and feel good about what we're doing. And that's the problem with these specific disclosures. So we might want to tie this together to the discussion we're going to have later on in the article. And I'd be happy to co-author if that's helpful.
So I'm assuming it's more expensive if you are requesting specific source? Yes.
Well,
How much more?
No, it could be cheaper.
So why?
Our purchases are so tiny
Yeah.
that it's ineffective to go out and contract directly with a provider when our usage is just so out of sync with the rest. This is the cheapest way to do it.
Yeah, we have looked into it. I mean, I've asked that question too,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news, in 2023 we might get power out from WAPA. 25?
Yes.
Oh,
But yes, but that's still looking pretty good.
yeah.
That
That would be an
federal
example of a direct purchase where we're buying from the
We made the first cut.
yeah.
So, for
But that would be cheaper, and it would be efficient to do.
Yes.
But the others haven't been. So I move that we approve the label, power source labeling.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving on to 8M, the propane carbon offset program, which Bob was referring to.
Maybe start with Eric. You're right. How this
Yeah,
idea
well, this
came
was-
about?
This is my idea, and I'll just try to be brief about it. My wife and I took a round-trip airplane trip to Mexico on United Airlines this past spring. When I got back for the first time ever, I had an email waiting from United Airlines saying, would you like to offset the carbon emissions that generated by your use of in his flights? So I clicked on something. So the point of this is it was easy. So I clicked on something. It said, where did you go? What was your round trip? By the way, I could put in other flights too. So I decided that we're taking another long flight in the fall. I'll put that one in too. Boom, boom. It came back with an estimate of how much carbon we were responsible for doing that. Then it said, would you like to offset this? I said yes. And it sent me two options. Now these were to renewable energy or carbon, the sustainability stuff done by private organizations. One was a for-profit organization, one was a non-profit organization. And so I actually went to those websites just to see what they did. I chose one of them. It was all of $40 or something like that. And I did it, and it went to my credit card, and boom, done. The point is, obviously, I could always go and find on my own how to offset things, but I don't know how to do that. I mean, it would take time. The point is, it was easy, and United made it easy for me to do. That was the point. So I said, because we are doing this heat pump study to see if in the future we could avoid some carbon produced from burning propane in larger projects, but we don't have a way for doing that for individual homes. And heat pumps aren't likely to be a good option for individual homes. So I said, well, why couldn't we adopt this methodology and offer it as a volunteer? The other thing is the United thing is a volunteer thing. It's not added onto my fare. It's a volunteer thing. So why not try to do the same thing in Kirkwood having to do with our use of propane? And coupled with Bob's information from his ties to the California Energy Commission and so on, with the thought that we will probably be required to offset this carbon production at some point within the next decade, why not start now on a voluntary basis but make it easy? So that's the idea. I talked to Bob about it because of his expertise, and he said, well, rather than finding an organization that vets other organizations on their programs and makes it worthwhile to donate to them, why don't we collect the money directly and buy additional renewable energy credits, which we do now to the tune of 30% of our electricity use. So that would make it really easy. And it's a direct thing. I mean, people feel like I'm really doing it directly here in Kirkwood. And so we talked about it at the planning committee. The planning committee thought it was a good idea. But the methodology would be, to make it easy, would have to be a technology thing. And so we punted over to Bob, who was on the planning committee and accepted it gracefully. So that was the idea. And, the IT committee did consider it, but I think people, whether it was committee or staff, I don't know, raised concerns about how much time it would take, the effort it would take. And in the packet, there's an estimate of district staff costs of $3,500 a year to do this. I think it's really important to do something. B, we can't afford the $3,500. I mean, if it was going to cost that, I would just take $3,500 and buy more RECs with $3,500 and not go through anything else. But I don't believe that that's the only option, and I think it could be made so that it's very inexpensive and easy to do and automated to do. And it would have to do with how people make choices, how often they make the choices, et cetera. And so my suggestion at this point is to put this on a combined planning committee, IT committee goals, objectives, to explore this and find a better way to do it so it doesn't cost anywhere close to $3,500 a year to execute. So that's my suggestion at this point.
So you're recommending a committee?
They'd be assigned to the planning and IT committees.
Okay.
Because it's an issue. It is an issue. We burn propane. We put carbon into the air. It's an issue. And for a ski resort area to do that without trying to offset it at this point is crazy.
So would this be done on a monthly basis then, or?
Well, that's what's got to be explored.
The proposal was annual,
Yeah.
so I could discuss the proposal whenever it's appropriate.
So that's the background and my suggestion.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think, what do you want to do next, Eric? This?
Yeah, I thought basically staff was estimating, Kelly estimated about 5 hours a month to do this, so I thought $3,500 was a pretty small cost comparatively for 5 hours a month out of our staff, which was a reasonable amount of staff time for implementing this. So because you have to either work through PCS or staff has to input this their hourly thing, purchase the annual purchase from Shell, et cetera, and that was all calculated into it. So that's where that came from. Is just that's just staff time. That's all that is.
Well, this may be the best thing, and we may all decide it's the best thing, but I would like to explore a way of making it even easier and less expensive to do. But Bob has done some good work on this at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Brandy, do you want to explain what we currently do on your chart?
Yes. So what we currently do, we are required to meet portfolio content standards, and we purchase RECs through Shell to offset a percentage of our electric sales. Previously, in periods 1 and 2, we were under an exemption that allowed us to use the least expensive Category 3 RECs because at the time those periods were happening, we either were not connected to the grid or we were in the middle of transitioning. We are in a new period now, period 3, where our goal is 33%, and we are no longer under that exemption. So we have to use the same mix as everybody else of Category 1 RECs, which actually have green energy, which is either generated in California or directly transmitted to California. That is the majority of what we need to purchase. We are allowed to use up to 10% of the Category 3 RECs, but those are generated outside of California, and the energy doesn't come into the state generally. Or it's, it is a lower quality energy credit. So that's how we currently do it. We purchase these offsets to meet our requirements through Shell. It has been the lowest cost way to meet our requirements so far. And the proposal that Bob and I looked at but did very little work on, put together was just how we would use those same energy credits to offset a customer's voluntary use. If they wanted to be more than 33% renewable, up to 100%, or simply donate to the cause of making Kirkwood's Power more green.
So So legally, by 2045, we have to be at 100%. So Brandy and I combined two thought processes. One is, would you like to offset your propane usage? And the other is, would you like to be 100% renewable energy ahead of the 2045? Might as well offer both while we're doing it, because some people might be, in some sense, one might inspire the other. Just to give you what I wrote up here, for my household to be 100% renewable on electricity would cost me additional $5.35 for the year. That was at the lower recs, I think. I have to double check. Yeah, $55.10 would be at the level one recs. And my propane for my house, for the offsetting it for the whole year, at what we proposed here was $18.50. So it's currently not a large amount of money. As a community, if we want to, if we care about climate change, you want to get ahead of the curve, instead of doing the minimum required by government law, we could offer that, and it would, at the current rates, it would not be a significant cost. And again, as Eric mentioned, this is 100% voluntary to do. So for electricity, Brandy and I decided that the Tier 1 RECs was what we would propose. What that means is so just to explain what this means, when you produce power, there's two attributes. One is the actual power, and the other is the environmental attributes. Those can be sold separately. So what happens is we buy X number of RECs. At the end of the year, the government adds up all the claims against every power supplier, what they put on and what people are claiming, and if they balance, they consider it done. So that's the way they make sure. So we say, well, we bought these RECs, and we bought them from this individual company, and they put this much onto the grid. They add up all the sources. If they don't balance, somebody's lying, and they investigate. So it is truly renewable, delivered into California, and we used our fair share. The level 3 RECs are, for example, if you're a developer and you put solar on somebody's home, they say, well, I don't care if it's renewable or not. What the grid sees is you didn't ask for that much power because you generate some of your own. So my feeling on level 3 RECs, it really doesn't advance the cause. It just pays for stuff in arrears, and at this point, it's not worth our recommendation to go that way. So that would be how renewable energy would be. Instead of saying, would you like 45 or 70, we'd just say it's either 100 or what's required. Now, over the course of time, one of the things I want to mention that we want to budget for is the cost to get to 100%. Right now, we're offsetting that by our sale of our allocation from the greenhouse gas fund. But eventually that will cost dollars. So I think people need to be aware when going forward that we need to do that. So coming to propane, there's sort of two options. One option would be to look for a project. For example, there are landfills in other states that are not required to capture their methane emissions. So if they go out and do that and destroy the methane before it gets in the atmosphere, we can pay for that, or someone who wants to do that. We could do something like that, or we could just say, we know what the greenhouse gas savings is from a REC. We'll just apply that. And Brandy and I both recommend we just do that. So then there's just one additional purchase through Shell. And the idea is we do this once a year. So based on the last fiscal year, we'd send people notice, assuming you do the same amount next year, this is what it would cost to be 100% renewable, 100% offset of your propane. Check yes or no if you want one or the other. And then at the end of the year, if you used a little bit less, you have a credit going into the next year. If you used a little bit more, we would buy a little additional amount if you bought the following year. Otherwise, you didn't quite offset 100%. So that's the idea behind the program. The unknowns are, would there be any participation beyond
me
and me?
Get Vail to participate.
Well, this is also a little bit tied into that because Vail has a company-wide goal of being 100% carbon-free by 2030 or something, and Brian Bigley is on our committee.
Right.
So.
From my perspective, how do I participate as a condominium because my propane's run through the HOA? So we would need to consider how I could contribute to that because I don't have a propane meter for my unit, but I would want to contribute. So that's something I think your idea of a committee to continue to explore this is good.
Well, you have a hot water heater, right?
No, it's all boiler.
It's just
the boiler. It's all shared.
Shared
Yeah.
boiler,
The HLA could.
And my radiant heat is through that too.
Yeah, so you're right. So in places where there's shared heat resources,
We'd
we
have
don't
maybe have a way to
we don't
give
have
an
a straightforward
estimate
way.
of I don't know. Maybe something we can work on. But just from my perspective,
Yeah, that's right.
I would want to know
That's
that.
a good. That's right. That's a complication that we haven't explored yet. The other complication is the easiest way to pay for it. One proposal Brandy made to me would be to just say, just do it on a credit card. If you want to do it, click here, enter your credit card number, and we just do it, and it's done. And then, at the end of the sign-up period, Brandy gets an indication of how many additional recs to buy. The other way would be they sign up yes, and then it shows up one time as a line item on their billing statement. That either requires manually entering in up to 600 items, or actually it's more if everybody participates, or developing an automated feed, which would be beneficial for other uses. But those are kind of the complications. But in my mind, it's whether the community is interested in this or not is the first thing to answer. Kelly.
There are also unknowns with the accounting of it all. I haven't had a chance to speak to Olga to see what the implications are with
Right.
how it needs to be properly accounted for, how we're recognizing, this revenue that we're taking in from customers and how it's applied. So there are accounting implications as well that would need to be explored.
Yeah, what I view it is like the fish fund. Money comes in, money goes out.
I just have to be
But I don't-
sure that we're
Right, but
following.
we could flow it through the volunteer fire department. But yeah, you're right.
And
Yeah,
The other thing that goes to what
That's right.
Bob and Brandy agreed on, and I wholeheartedly agree, is if we put it on a bill, it becomes much more complicated versus just a credit card click. Because one, let's just think about the scenario where we get into an issue of non-payment and I have to lien someone. Can I lien them on a voluntary contribution? And do we have to break that out separate? It just creates more havoc, and that would reduce, if we went to the credit card option, staff time I think would be significantly reduced. So just something else to think
we
about.
do the credit card for like the 4th of July
Yeah.
event, so we
Yeah.
have experience doing that. We know how to do it. In terms of Vail's participation, they could do this on their own. We're not doing anything that couldn't be done. So I don't know where that stands.
It'd be up to them.
Yeah, I mean they can't go. Can they go purchase Rex on the market by themselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they can, or they could buy offsets. What they did several years ago, they used the Bonneville Power Foundation, and they bought offsets from Bonneville Power. And so several years ago, there used to be little placards in the restaurants pointing this out. But so they may or may not do it. But yeah, the question is how to make this as simple, as valuable as possible, as simple as possible, and then finding out who wants to participate. So one thing we could possibly do is put together a survey and send it to everybody and say, if we're thinking of this, if it was available now, this is what it would cost you for the prior year. What do you think this is a good use of resources? What do you think about it? Yes, no. We could do that and then see what the response is.
So I just suggest that we put this on our goals for next year with a thought that maybe we take 6 months and try to figure it out.
Yeah. No,
That's my suggestion.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile endeavor, I think, and I'm happy to put that on my goals and work.
Do you
work
have
through
any
planning
thoughts
or?
on this, Richard?
Yeah, I'm going to do them. Yeah. So first I'd like to applaud and thank both Eric and Bob to look into that. I think, Kirkwood should be sensitive to this issue because if there is no more snow, we'll be in a serious trouble. And so,
I and I would be reduced.
and I'm convinced,
I and I would be reduced. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to point out that benefit.
next topic. And I'm convinced that actually there is going to be a huge response from the community. And that actually the bigger response, the easier it's going to be managed because we can standardize. Ultimately, having just a checkbox once a year, the same way you have the emergency list, and then go process through the payroll. If you need to use the credit card system, that works too. So it's bravo. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions?
Do you want to put that under planning or IT?
Both. Both, and I mean, maybe planning. I'm not. I guess planning could sponsor the survey or something like that to see if it's
Yeah.
a feasible thing to do. But IT would have to.
We can put it in
figure-
planning, and once we decide, if we decide to implement it, then
Okay.
it'd be an IT.
Okay.
Just to simplify things.
So do we need a board action for this? We're just deciding?
I'll add it to my goals and objectives for
Okay.
approval
Yeah.
in July.
Good.
Yeah, and I want to thank Brandy for pitching in this. This is all pretty much last minute. So.
Pretty good for last minute, so.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to item 8N, snow removal budget.
So this is a continuation, mainly from April. Made revisions after the May meeting from additional direction from the board. And thank Bertrand for catching one formula error, my summation on minutes, which didn't really change anything substantively, but it's more accurate now on those for the HOAs. And Stanish also wanted some additional spreadsheets in there as well, which are now included per his request. So those are provided as well. And I don't know what else to add except for this is the latest thing.
We talked about it quite a while. Bertrand was on the call. Let me try to summarize what was discussed. First of all, the Finance Committee did not come out with any specific recommendation. There was discussion around whether or not we should be using the 3-year average, which is what's reflected in the tables, I believe, now, for HOAs, or drop the 16-17 and instead insert the operator's feedback as the third data point. So that was discussed extensively. The driveways were discussed. Standish expressed concern that a little bit of time change creates a $500 difference in what the charge would be. And although in the end he said he didn't feel completely strongly about it, he was, I think, leaning towards wanting to average the same way we do for the HOAs rather than these 4 tiers. My suggestion at that, which I made, was if we wanted to go with the 4 tiers, to tighten them up so there's not a $500 difference. And I did calculate how we might do that and sent a possibility to Eric, so that the range was a smaller range. We talked briefly, Nancy brought up, and we talked briefly about the overall budget, of course, is a substantial increase because of the additional equipment. We're getting housing. We've got a very clear staffing plan. And does that somehow tie to a level of service that we could express in the contracts? So we talked about that. I think that's what we talked about.
I just want to clarify, there's 2 topics that I see on this. One is, are we ready to approve the actual expenditures and the amount of total revenue, regardless of how it's allocated? And then the second question is, deciding on the revenue we have to achieve, how do we want to allocate it? So, I mean, I'm prepared today to kind of decide on the total amount of revenue we need and how we're going to spend it, I'm not convinced yet on the best allocation, and I have some things that I want to discuss, ideas on that, but maybe I'd like to suggest, Jeff, that maybe we first talk about whether we're comfortable with this expense amount and the revenue to cover it, and separate that from the discussion of what are the different choices of how to have a methodology for allocating it, and I'd like to suggest that I personally am not ready to decide that yet, but maybe other people are. I don't know.
I should add one thing. Bertrand brought up the possibility of using a base rate methodology, adding that in. I know my comment at the time was, and I have another idea, but my comment at the time was I thought a base rate approach was a very good idea if this were an enterprise service. I don't quite understand how it's used if it's a contract service, where HOAs can opt in or opt out, and then what do you do with the base rate? I mean, I do have another idea, which I am sure Shanahan will say is not legal, but we might explore it a little bit once we get to that point.
Anyway, Jeff, does that make sense to you as a
Well,
approach?
I'm not quite sure it makes sense to me yet.
No, I just mean splitting up into the two topics.
Yeah. So what would you like to begin with?
Just the total revenue required and the expenses associated with it.
Basically, as expressed
the
in
budget,
the
the budget,
budget.
separate from how it's been.
Okay.
Yeah, the budget, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, why don't we begin that?
Well, I'll just, I mean, it started out at being something over $700,000. We reduced hours budgeted for some of the seasonal, and now it's down to 678. It's a big jump, but it's justified. I mean, I can't see, this is why I asked for the G&A expenses, particularly for snow removal too, and I just can't see where to cut back and respond to the community's desire for a certain level of service, given the need for new equipment, which is what's driving this increase. So if somebody has a smart idea about how to reduce it further, I would go for it. But I think this is a little painful, but reasonable. So I'd be ready to approve that.
You have a question?
On the budget thing, we are moving that item. I have a question. So there is something like 55K of unscheduled labor expenses. That was, that was actually shown part of the thing. So how is it handled in this case? So if you had 55K excess labor expenses compared to the budget, how does the PUD pay for it?
Okay, I'll answer that. So we're anticipating right now a $53,000 deficit at the end of the year. There will be an interfund loan from electric to cover that. And the way we budget it is that would be paid back by snow removal over 5 years plus interest. And I'll add to that, because you'll ask the question next, we run a deficit in capital projected next year and the following year. How do we handle that? We do an interfund loan from electric, pay it back over 5 years plus interest. And that's how both of those deficits are covered. So this year and then the next 2 years are projecting deficits. This year in operation, the next 2 years in capital, with the repayment starting on the first portion this year and then escalating as we. And if we need less in capital, then the repayment and the interfund load would be less. That's how we're doing it.
Okay, so so what's proposed for the budget is $678,081.
Right, which is about a 15% or so, 16% increase.
So are we all in agreement on that amount as a budgeted amount?
I am.
Yeah, I think you have consensus.
I don't have another number to put in, so
I just
will
think
say-
the things that went wrong this year are going to continue to go wrong unless we decide to staff for a strong snow year and then deal with overstaffing. If we understaffing and then having a strong snow year didn't make anybody happy. Now, maybe there was somebody. I don't want to exaggerate, but I don't know if anybody was happy with the start of this, the season in December, and the equipment is busted. So if we don't repair it, then we'll have staff available to do it, and all they'll have is a snow shovel. So I don't see any way except to fix that and to explain to the community that we are always going to staff for a strong year and not wait and then try to recover, and that we're going to fix the broken equipment. And I think you've done a good job of figuring out what's ideal and what's within the range of painful but reasonable. So I'm prepared to support that number also.
Peter?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so the board's in agreement on the
On the budget.
$678,000 figure for the budget amount. Now, how that gets allocated, distributed.
So let me just review
Thank you, sir.
my perception of what the Finance Committee discussion was on this. So what's in the document is the 3-year average. Adopting that methodology, because that's kind of what we do for the other utilities. We now have 3 years of data points. 2 of the years were corrected for known errors, like the driveways and so on, the 16-17 and 17-18. Bertrand did a statistical analysis, if I can call it that, which showed a lot more variation. I'm sorry? Variance, yeah.
We're talking about
Variance.
HOAs now?
Yes, I'm talking about
Let's start with
the
HOAs.
This is at the
Okay.
HOA level.
Okay.
A lot more variance for certain HOAs than others, and that is, I think I'm picturing this correctly, that is an indication of problems with the measurement. And therefore, possibly in the most problematic year, which is 16-17, should be dropped. And instead, if we want a third data point, use the operator's estimates. Now, I do have a question about that. I don't want to dominate this conversation about it, but I do have a question about that. Well, and what I said in the meeting was that I was going to look also to Bob about the GPS, because it's been my understanding from all the discussions we've had, it's always been my understanding that at the large area level or polygons, the GPS was accurate within a reasonable percentage. There are probably some inaccuracy, but within a reasonable percentage. That the driveway level, small or very adjacent small HOAs, that there was inaccuracy that had to be corrected. And so it wasn't clear to me, like, for example, in East Meadows, the large variation from 2 years ago to last year, there may be behavioral things in there, including patterns of coming up. And by the way, interestingly enough, I mean, this is just one data point. I'm not proposing that this is accurate for East Meadows, but I happened to check yesterday my use of our use of our house in those 3 years, and it exactly follows the pattern that's shown with the GPS. Just so you know, I mean, it just is. I mean, the days of use based on water use, 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, follows almost identically the pattern with GPS. I don't know that my use of my house has anything to do with snow removal. So, it's like, so that reminds me of my statistics professor saying, if you go to city after city, you'll find a very strong correlation between number of bars and number of churches.
Unless you are making snow.
And it has nothing to do with numbers of bars and number of churches. It has to do with population. So, but it also, I think, may have to do with the implementation, and I can't remember exactly when it was implemented, the ability to request a driveway to be snow to be removed within a certain period of time. I mean, by the time I arrive, ultimately last year or halfway through the year changed to a priority system rather than a guarantee that would be done by a certain time. Well, East Meadows makes, I believe, heavy use of that system when it was in place. I don't know that it was in place in 1617, was it?
Yeah, it was. It was.
I know that I didn't use it very much. I mean, I started using it when I became aware of it. I mean, more aware of it, and so on. So I don't know. I just don't know how much is GPS, how much is variation for East Meadows, specifically East Meadows, and I guess Palisades is another, was because of GPS accuracy versus behavioral stuff within East Meadows or within Palisades or within some of the others where there are some larger variations. I just don't know. And so I was hoping I could get a clearer idea today about that. So that was the discussion we had, and Bertrand feels strongly that 1617 should be dropped and we should be using the other. I think he also feels fairly strongly about base rate, using a base rate. I'm not sure we can incorporate that this year, but
What
again,
would be the impact if we just use the last 2 years instead of the 3? Is there a big difference? In the
yeah.
overall average?
Well, for some,
Okay. So it's some gain, some lose?
yeah.
I mean, I have to believe that the first year was experimental and it was pretty sketchy.
Well, I don't.
I mean,
think
I know
that's-
you're doing your best. I don't mean that as an insult, but
and no, yeah, there's none taken. If we look at the first and second years, they're pretty much the same algorithms. There's really no change between it. So I don't know of any specific thing that we've done, or I can't remember. Maybe there's something someone remind me of that would say there's a reason why 1617 is materially different than 1718. The first time I noticed things going weird was in 1718 when I noticed it's in 1617. Every time my driveway was plowed, I got a notice, and I was there quite a bit, and I watched it. In December of 1718, I watched my driveway getting plowed, and no report, and it got accredited to my neighbor. So the first time I was aware of something really not right in Dodge City was 1718. So I don't know why. I don't have a specific recommendation of why you would exclude one of those years as opposed to just including both. There isn't really any difference. Now, if we look at 1819, there's several categories of major differences. Okay, the first is actually the curation of looking at places where we look at something that doesn't add up, and we actually move time from one place to another. Now, the total amount of adjustments in this last year was 2 hours and 43 minutes. The total time, this is just HOS, the total time was 127 hours. So the difference, it's just not as big. That's not. I mean, it's more accurate, and most of that was KMA. So it wasn't everywhere. It was really isolated into certain very specific areas. And Eric spent a lot of time working on that, and I spent a lot of time figuring out how to detect where the errors might be. The other things were algorithmic errors. So, for example, we're trying to figure out when we enter a landmark and when we leave. Well, if those are 2 days apart, we don't want to assume it's there for 2 days. So originally, we guessed that 4 hours was the maximum any unit would ever spend in it. It turns out that's not true. There were times where there was 6 hours. There's even times, I think, Eric, where there was 11 hours. So one of the things we corrected this year, but did not go back and try to fix in the past, is every time there was a mismatch, there wasn't an entry and exit due to this, we went back and said, how far back can we go? And then we changed the algorithm so for each AOA, there's a specific amount of time to allow for the entry and exit. Another problem which Bertrand discovered is if one of those is missing, suddenly you're matching the wrong entry and exit. And the way that showed up is it showed more time than the elapsed time that was possible. So this was a little bit like propane. Sometimes it just magically appears, but at the end of the year. So how we deal with that, we haven't fully figured out. There was a few cases like that. So there are places where the data doesn't match up. There are places where the data was inaccurate. 18, 19, we spent an exceptional amount of time on HOAs trying to get it close. So my feeling is you either include, if you include both, I don't know of any reason why you exclude year one but include year two. They're pretty much, whatever errors there were, I don't know why 1 year is different than the other. But there may be some good reason.
May I make a little comment here?
Yeah.
Actually, we did change polygons, and not that much the HOA.
Yeah, this year, yes, right.
And the year before too, actually. That polygon you've been changed. I mean, I have some polygon that you sent me after the first year that was fixed for the second year. So even changing a driveway polygon is impacting the HOA actually, because the HOA is encompassing it. So bottom line is, last year is definitively more accurate than the previous year. There is no question about that. Agree with. I understand the need not to rely on a single year because there are actually also patterns, snow conditions, behavioral. I don't think actually asking to get your driveway done change the number of time the PUD is coming. On mine, I clearly see it. They were coming earlier because I requested that they were not coming back later. So if they had not come earlier, they would have come later. So it doesn't change the number of time. So I don't think that's going to be a factor. But snow condition, whatever, we cannot know anything. One of the problems we have is if there is a mistake in one place, it actually impacts every single HOA the way we do these things. And what I see is the first year has a variance. In the variance, which is important, when sometimes Eric said there's only it's less than 1%, that many HOA has less than 1% of variation. The point is, East Meadow and KMA are 30+%, so 1% is an acceptable error. But take a small unit, and they are below 1%, and 1% error is huge because it's an absolute, it's talking a percentage of the allocation. So what we need to do is work in relative percentage. So we need to compare the variation to the size of the HOA. And that's relative. And that's what I do in my calculation. And then I have a 500-fold increase of variation on the small HOA versus the big one. So we cannot, so that's something that's very important, is you have to work, when you do QC with using the variance, you have to look at relative variation, not absolute variation. That was part of my initial email I sent. And so bottom line, summarizing, the last year is better, and I believe, as you actually remember a year ago, you were wondering if I'd be happy today, and I can say yes, at least today I think the GPS data is usable. That to answer your question a year ago. Okay. And I thank you, both of you, for all the work you've done working with me to find the issues and make it to a stage where it's not perfect, but it's totally usable and reliable. So the question is, what do we do with the two previous years which have been corrected but not curated?
Correct.
And they have a lot of issues and we don't know how they are impacted. Personally, I would just use the last year with operating feedback as a moderator. I know it's not perfect, but actually the variation of the operating feedback compared to the last 2 years that is actually much more in line than the previous year. So I'm leery of having a big flag. A big flag on the first year is there was less minutes spent in East Meadow 2 years ago compared to last year. The average for all the HOA is 70% increase 70% increase when you compare the minutes of 2 years ago to last year. And for East Meadow, it's 20% decrease, and that's the only one. And the problem is this difference is just spreading on all the HOA, and that makes this first year unreliable. And that's why I don't have a problem using the year before, is because that is not happening. So even if there are problems, it does not impact as the average for everyone.
Yeah.
So
let me answer that, because that
Yes.
answers Eric's question, if I can just... Is that
Yes.
okay? So to answer your question, what if we did 2 years, the last two versus the last three? Basically, here's what changes. There's a $100 difference in KMA's contract amount. There's a $20,000 increase for East Meadows and a decrease for all the remaining HOAs. That's what happens, essentially. I mean, that's what it is. A 20 increase for East Meadows, a decrease for everyone except for KMA that sees a decrease of $100. So I guess it is a decrease.
Did the East Meadows polygon ever change?
Not since I've been here, no. The only polygons that have changed, and I'm unaware of anyone changing last year, so I'm not sure what that's about.
2 years ago.
Or 2 years ago. Then that would have been before me. Okay, so that's possible. The only ones that changed this year are, and Drew will help me clarify, Sun Meadows 3-4 changed.
Yep.
Meadowstone changed.
Yes.
I think we reduced a little bit off Edelweiss that was sticking out, or was it Thimblewood? One of those two.
It was Edelweiss.
Edelweiss, and we enlarged Unit 3.
And Jeff Smith's house.
And because of the loader issue, yes.
Yep.
Right, we removed it from
KMA's
used to get some KMA, used to get billed for Jeff.
Yeah. And then when Whiskey Towers and Snowcrest requested their contract area be reduced, we reduced the polygon according to their request. Those are the only ones that have changed from the HOA since I've been here. So I can't speak to before that, but those are the ones definitively that I know have changed.
well, before you came, there was a number of homeowner driveways that was actually wrong. Some of them were closing the road, and so this has been fixed actually. And but anyway, bottom line, I think the first year is suspicious, and we know because of the way the system is set that a mistake, as I said, it's bizarre that a year that is so much bigger 2 years ago, that less time was spent in East Meadows.
So the only...
If I could, Frank spend.
So I'm sitting on a couple of questions, and so perhaps we'll just let you know that I want to ask about Juniper Ridge and also want to ask about Whiskey Run. In terms of percentage increase, Juniper Ridge has the unfortunate distinction of being about 75% above the previous year's run rate. And the second question relates to, it seems like we might be doing less.
Say that again, Frank. I'm not seeing that.
If you take $14,620.
Oh, you're talking dollars.
Lay it over.
So you're talking dollars. I'm looking at time. So in terms of time, Juniper Ridge was the first year, the 16-17 year was 8.38%. Last year was 6.31, and this year 6.5. So from last year to this year, in terms of relative percent, they only increased 0.19% of the total. The contract value is increasing. So looking at that's not really analogous, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that Juniper Ridge has stayed relatively constant. Their average 3 years is, either 6.5% or 5.6 if I toss out the first year.
So that may be the case. However, it's still a small HOA that is looking at a contract going from 20,000 to 35,000. So in layman's terms, it's 75%, and we'd all love to have a 75% pay increase, but we know that's not happening. And so I noticed last year, although I wasn't part of this exercise, that you had a cap going on, which was perhaps some way of ameliorating the issues with data collection in previous years.
Right.
So I'm a bit concerned about going back to the HO with this schedule and letting them know that if all things being equal, we may have to ask for the 75% as increase in HOA dues. So then just to
follow up on what we were talking about with the 2 years versus the 3 years. So Eric, it looks like you might have the spreadsheet open.
Mm-hmm.
What's the impact of Juniper Ridge if it was just 2 years versus 3 years?
So, if it was 2 years, so the 3-year adjusted average is 6.5% of the total. The 2-year adjusted average is 5.6%. As I said, East Meadows takes the hit up. They go from 30% to 35% roughly. Everybody else goes down except for KMA, which stays at 32.7, which they've been at for all 3 years.
And did you math that out in terms of how much Juniper Ridge would on your spreadsheet?
Yeah, I do have the contract amount. If we use the 2-year average, it would be 30,000 instead of 35,000. Would be the contract.
All right, so that's something worth discussing. And then for Whiskey Run, is that just a less area plow that was driving that?
Yeah, they removed the area behind by the propane beds, the gravel area.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, they're seeing that.
Okay, so the question still remains, because East Meadows would absorb the big change, right? What you're saying?
Yes, East Meadows would see a $19,000 increase plus or minus.
And no one else would get a huge change one way or another. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, give me a quick sec. I'm just looking through the numbers real fast. I don't see anyone else increasing. No. And then that's spread out. 20,000 is spread across the remaining HOAs. It depends on the size of their allocation, obviously, the percentage, but everybody decreases.
So, what would we say to East Meadows? We would say, because there was so much variation, we think there's an error, and therefore you're going to be charged more? Or, I mean, somebody's got to tell me what the nature of the error was. It wasn't a change in polygons. It wasn't a change in how driveways and HOA are allocated within East Meadows, because they're all together. They're none of the reasons that have been discussed, particularly for KMA and for some of the others. So what? And if there was consistency in a whole number of HOAs over the 3 years, including that year, indicating that GPS was possibly accurate, quote unquote, then why would it be inaccurate in East Meadows and accurate in other places? There's got to be an explanation. If we're going to go back to the East Meadows and say you're going to carry cost-wise, percentage-wise, by the way, East Meadows has always paid someplace between 30 and 33%, regardless of what the GPS was saying. That was the result of caps, right? East Meadows paid more than what the GPS was saying. And we all agreed to that.
Mm-hmm.
But now what's the explanation? Just that there was variation? Unexplained variation. Is that something that this district can go say to East Meadows?
And that,
I'm not comfortable saying that to East Meadows.
I mean, what is it? What's the source?
So, again, the fact that there was less minute span in a much bigger year is suspicious, number one.
Okay, but what is it?
Let me finish. Second, so it indicates there is potentially problem in that year. Second, when you have a problem somewhere, it impacts everything. I mean, look, the last 2 years, and are not perfect, but East Meadows stay at 30 and 32%, if I remember correctly. And I can bet you next year you'll be around 30% again. This is where you belong, and this is where KMA belong. So having something which was at 22% on a big year has a huge impact. So we could spend a lot of time trying to find out what it is. I don't know what it is. I cannot answer your question. This is where the problem is. Actually, I never had the full data. I only got the post report. So anything happened before is a black box to me. So if I had that, I could start looking into it. But is it really worth it? We want 3 years. We could take the last 2 years, take the operator feedback. It is not perfect, but it's much more in line with the other year. So we don't add more noise to the system. And that's what I recommend. And the impact is going to bring East Meadow to about 30% this year. If we do that, I don't have the statistics in front of me. And I mean, do you really think you are going to be at 22% next year?
So, those are good questions. So I just want to do the quick math here. So, this year, subtracting driveways from KMA, but leaving them in East Meadows, the total number of hours was 559 in East Meadows and 593 in KMA. So a little bit more. The year before was a low snow year. It was 224 in East Meadows and 305. But the weird thing is, in the first year, East Meadows was 463 to KMA 633. They're so substantially different in year one, whereas they're closer to each other in year 2 and 3. I think it's worth a little bit of time to see if we can try to figure out what it was. One way to do that would be to go, by storm and say, which storms vary. I think it's worth spending a little bit of time to do a couple of things. One is to shock any specific HOA without an explanation, I think, is not anything we should pursue. So anything that's out of the norm is worth a little more investigation. I think it's worth some investigation, and maybe it's 4 hours or something to try to figure out what was there about year one.
I mean, it may have been that time thing you were saying where
it might have been
people entered but didn't exit, or people exited but didn't enter, or something. I mean, it could have been that.
It
might,
don't know. But it didn't happen a lot. But in a heavy snow year, they're spending longer in there, so some of them can be missed. I think it's worth spending, some budgeted number of hours to see whether we can figure out what was unique about year one, because its pattern, which is what Bertrand is observing, is so different than year 2 and 3.
No,
let's see if we can figure out what.
No,
it is.
I understand. So
Yeah.
here's where I stand on this. So if there is an explanation that I, as both a board member and a resident of East Meadows, can stand up at the July 4th HOA meetings and say, here's what's happening, and this is why. Even though, and this is what the East Meadows people say, even though they feel like they were carrying a bigger load than they should have for many years, that's the perception. That's the perception. Now they are being penalized because they had a year that was lower use, but there's a suspicion that it's not accurate. So, but if there's an explanation, I would be fine with the 2 years in the operator's feedback. I just need an explanation. I need to know that there is an objective reason or.
I'll be happy to have, if you want me to send me some data, try to looking at it. As I said, with what data I have, I just cannot answer your question, but it is an outlier, and before accepting it, we need to find out.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is an unusual thing.
Yeah.
But like I said, my days there were also that variation, so had that variability.
And I'd like to mention, actually, that's why I use this graph. I mean, it's very simple to do, and I would like, actually, the staff to do that, actually, so we can see this is looking good. No, just move on to the next topic. So having just a big table with gazillion numbers, I mean, some people can handle it, I do, but most people don't. And so I think having a little graph is important. Same thing for the driveway. I mean, who actually could figure anything from that driveway table? Once I do that matrix with the GPS average versus the driveway, then suddenly things start to make sense, and there is a few areas you may look into actually to see if they are accurate. So that, and I can help if the district would like some advice on how to do that, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
So
one last small quick thing. So if you end up with the 3-year average, what the board is saying to the community is, on a simple 3-year average, you have as much confidence in year 1 as year 2 and year 3.
Which is not the case.
Which is something that is on a global scale. It seems like there is less confidence in year 1 and perhaps more diligence and more work done in years 2 and 3. So if you end up with a 3-year average, you have to live with the indictment that this is the same level of confidence in the 3 years. And that's where it's something that's worth the board considering maybe a different approach based on that confidence level.
Well, I just want to be clear, my understanding has been that at the HOA level, we could have good confidence. At the driveway level or small adjacent HOAs, we did not have confidence. That has been my understanding since we began discussing this. And that's why I'm confused about East Meadows. East Meadows is a large polygon. The polygon hasn't changed. The GPS was apparently accurate for a whole number of HOAs because there's been very little variation. Why would GPS be different in East Meadows?
Yeah. And when you say
Why would there be why would there be? So I'm just saying that I don't necessarily have low confidence in the first year. There may be something amiss with East Meadows. I would just like to understand what it is.
Thanks a lot.
So, just try to summarize one more thing. The problem of graph is that you have a scale which is based on the biggest. So you don't see the same detail for the small HOA. So it looks similar, but actually that's why I do this variance analysis. It shows that the first year has a 500% variance. Not 5%, or 500%. Above, if you compare the other years. So and that's true for, and I think there's 13 HOA that has a twofold change between the first year and the following 2 years. So we cannot say it looks accurate for the other one.
Well,
it's not true.
Looking at the graphic.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the graphic, which is
Yeah.
what you're. Well, but just a second, Bertrand. This is what you're advocating, that we look at a graphic so we can grasp it quickly. Well, I looked at the graphic and said, well, that's interesting.
Okay.
Now you're saying the graphic's not so good.
The graphic is showing you absolute variation. You have to see
Well, I
relative
understand.
variation.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm just.
Okay, so if I could interrupt, I found the issue.
Oh, okay.
So
That was fast.
well, I just wanted to confirm with
Well, if you
Bob.
talk long enough, he has plenty of time.
Well, yeah, as long as Bertrand talks, I'm able to get some work done. It's good. He's helping me out here. So what Michael did, because this again predates me. Normally, let me just go to this. If you see the adjustment that I made in 17-18 minutes for East Meadows, and the reason for that in the staff report. What happened in the prior year, for every HOA that had driveways were subtracted out. Michael accidentally subtracted out driveways for 16-17 for East Meadows, which he should not have done.
Oh.
So, I'm putting in the real number right now, and I'm going to tell you what the answer is. So, he had 400, well, let me just put it in, and I'll tell you what he had.
Driveway is 4%.
Hold on.
For East Meadows.
Bertrand, please let me finish. I let you.
That's not true.
So, what Michael had was 463 hours and 21 minutes, which is what he had. The real number is 559 hours and 3 minutes. He subtracted 88 hours away. And I think when he did it, it was prior to the final data because they don't add up correctly, but when he did the summation, he was doing it on the data he had. So now I've put that in. So, that being said, so I'm going to highlight that as yellow because that's now a change. So, now with that number in, so having corrected the 16-17 for East Meadows, they are at 27.26% of the total that year, instead of what they were before, which I deleted that line. Yeah, look at that. So they're at 23, good, because I'm in the spreadsheet, not in the PDF. Okay, so now I'm moving that forward. East Meadows 3-year adjusted allocation, and again, you'll have to excuse me because I have the spreadsheet and I've made the change. is 32.1. What were they before on the 3-year average? 30.9 or something?
30.9.
Okay, I remembered that right. So there's the change. So what that does is, and this goes to Bob's calculations, is the basically you're at 32.1 for a 3-year average for East Meadows and a 32.2 average for KMA. That goes to the analogy of what he was saying relative to the driveways. So with that error corrected, I'm glad I was able to find it that easy.
Well, that's the explanation I'm looking for.
Yeah. So there you go. So basically,
Absolutely, yeah. The beauty of the draft.
So yeah. So that was that's the problem with not going back and checking the old data.
Let's walk.
And that percentage is reasonably consistent with what East Meadows has always paid, regardless of what minutes said. And even before we had GPS,
Yeah.
it was always between 30 and 33%.
Yeah.
Unlike KMA, which was 16%, 17%.
Yeah, we are paying what we are asked for. I mean, yeah. So you,
So there you go. With that correction made, I'm definitely comfortable with the 3-year average. I think makes it look more
one
accurate.
little caveat is driveways are included in your percentage, and KMA driveways are not. So when you compare these numbers, this is comparing a bit apples and oranges.
No, but
you will have to add the.
I have always thought,
Yes.
just intuitively, that KMA and East Meadows should be paying about the same.
About the same. Yeah.
That's what I've always thought.
That is what the number shows now. Yeah.
Could we move on to driveways then?
So just before we do that, because I liked what you,
I
like what you did and globally broke it out. So
Okay.
I want to do the same step back and looking at my staff report, the historic averages of HOAs versus driveways versus KMPUD. And I looked at a lot more data before GPS too in terms of contract values.
Yeah.
Basically, where it comes down to looking at everything, and this is on prior iterations, this came out for everyone to look at. HOAs are about. So the district's been paying way too much for what we do in terms of minutes. It was just arbitrarily set back in the day, at about 13%. But what we've actually come to see, looking at the usage between driveways and KMA and everything, is about a 79, 11%, and 10% split between HOAs, driveways, and the district. And that's how I split the 678, which the board has agreed to, in setting the amounts at the 79, 11, and 10. And that goes back to the 13-14 data, looking at just the contract values. Is there a comfort level with that? Because that will change the HOAs, the driveways. If we aren't comfortable with that, then everything changes. But this is what we've been talking about since April, is 79, 11, 10. It's what I did for this year's breakout. Any concerns with that, or are we good with that?
If that's what the numbers,
It seems.
that's what the data says.
It seems it lines up with the data I've looked at. It seems reasonable.
I guess my only question would be reanalysis of East Meadows. Driveways taken out, would that change?
No. Because because I didn't count when I did that analysis. I did everything raw, and so their driveways were never counted as the driveway portion because those are separate contracts.
So just going back to the HOAs, East Meadows is now like 172. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I can give you the exact numbers: 172, 442 on the 3-year average.
Thank you. And KMA?
172, 721.
Good, they're paying a little bit more.
I think that was out loud, Eric.
Okay, I want an audit of the data.
Be easier to just get him to retract that statement.
I retract.
I think you said that out loud instead of
I meant to say that to myself.
There's some microphone error.
Turn your mic off.
Yeah. Driveways?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
with that correction, I want to make sure before we move forward, because I would remind the board is that they will well recall, so they probably don't need to be reminded, but I'm going to remind the board, we were lambasted for not having dollars out, and so I want to be able to send this out now as, here's the dollars for the HOAs. We're using this adjusted with this correction I just found, the 3-year average. I will be sending that to the HOAs.
It's fine by me to use the 3-year average with that significant correction and with what you've done for the district and the driveway. I mean, I am comfortable with that. No?
For the HOAs. I'm not talking driveways yet.
I need to look at the data.
So,
I'm asking the board who will vote and give me direction, because I take direction from the board.
That looks close, but I would request a little bit of time, not much, to just think about what you did and look at it.
Okay.
Because the thing I still can't, even with what you've done, it's still the fact that in year 1, East Meadows was 463 hours, and KMA was 633 hours of total activity.
Oh, you're looking at driveways?
I subtracted out the 83 hours of driveways.
88.8853 for East Meadows.
Can you say that again, the numbers?
1617 is 88 hours and 53 minutes for East Meadows.
It's 82 hours and 22 minutes. Although I'm willing to yield 6 hours to my distinguished colleague. So just to repeat, East Meadows in total was 463 hours in the first year. KMA minus the 82 hours.
82.22, you're right.
Yeah, okay. Minus the driveways. Oh, I'm sorry. That's East Meadows. Okay. So KMA was 713 total, minus 83, or 633 hours. So the difference is quite larger in that year than the other years, and I just want a chance to see if I can figure out why. And I'm not asking for much time, and my level of enthusiasm of spending a lot of time on this is not big.
No, and yeah,
I just want an hour. My thought is I'd go back and look at these by storm and say, were the storms about the historic ratios, or does one storm stand out? If it does, why? Is there some?
No, take that back. Yeah, it didn't update the year I was looking at, so there's even more. Yeah, you and I need to spend time.
Yeah, so I just think we're in the right trend line, but I think it's worth a few more hours to see if we can explain this anomaly. And to Frank's issue, I don't want to, the shock treatment, I'm not interested in shock treatment by HOA. So I think a huge change, unless there's some huge explanation, is ill-advised.
In a percentage.
In a percentage, yeah.
Dollars have been.
We know what the dollars need to be. I just think we need just a little bit more time.
Okay.
Driveways? Okay.
Moving on to driveway.
Oh, okay. Well, since you brought it up. One of the things I tried to do, which I started on but didn't finish, was to say, is there some way to throw out the odd data to try to get some statistically meaningful thing on driveways? So we tried an experiment, which we didn't finish, which is to take the 3 years' worth of driveways and to say anything under a minute we ignore, because that could have been a drive-by. And the reason why we ignore it is it lowers the average. So, if there's 50 drive-bys and there's 200 total, that really lowers the average a lot. So anything under a minute probably wasn't plowing the driveway. It was probably something else. The other thing we said is, now, what about the times when my neighbor gets credit for my driveway plow? Well, let's say anything over 6 minutes, we're going to temporarily ignore. So we take all of the data that's over a minute, less than 6 minutes, and for every driveway we compute an average. Then we say we're going to throw out things that are more than twice that calculated average. So we're trying to get rid of the, we spent 29 minutes here because the machine failed in a 2-minute plow. So we take all the big numbers, we throw them out, we then look at averages, and now we try to do two things. One is to say, how many of the total events did we ignore? If we ignored more than 50%, there's probably something weird about it. The second thing we do is say, do they now show some relative consistency from year to year? And so in doing that, it appears to be somewhat consistent. Almost everything is between 53%, and it's between 50% and getting up to 90%, except for the ones that have, there's an address on Fremont Drive that only has 3 entities, and that's because the ownership changed at the last minute. So anything that doesn't have a large statistical number, we say, all right, that requires separate analysis. In doing that, at first pass, it looks like that kind of gives a reasonable number. The next thing we could do is just do some rounding. Instead of saying we know it to 4 digits accuracy, just keep it to 2 digits. So instead of saying $797 this year, it's going to be $742. Round it to the nearest 100 or something, as opposed to doing EDUs. The problem with EDUs is there's some big shop treatment. There's an account that was about $1,000 for 3 years in a row, and now it goes to $2,000. In terms of happy customers, I think that we might have one less in doing that. If I do the percentage, okay, it still comes up higher, but it's nowhere as high. So that might be a way for driveways of at least removing noise at either end and coming up with something that, if we graphed it, might have some consistency. So that's a possible way of doing it that, on first blush, appears to have the data show some consistency.
Yeah, I mean, I would go for your guys' recommendation on this.
Yeah, and Eric and I started this about a month ago, but we haven't really had a chance. We focused on the HOAs, so we really haven't had a chance to go back and look at this.
What's the total number of driveways that we were talking about?
65. 66, 67. It depends on. We had a couple of dropouts this year.
It's 61 is the current driveway count.
I may come back.
How long would it take to measure 65 driveways?
55% increase proposed.
The problem is that there's no correlation between the size of the driveway and the level of effort required to plow it. There is zero correlation.
I just can't accept that.
You can accept or not accept it. The data doesn't lie. There is no correlation between the square footage in Cornice Court, where you have to move the snow twice, and there's no storage, and you have to blow it a second time, and a driveway somewhere else where there's lots of storage, and the difference between heavy snow on one side and light on the other, there's just no correlation. We can have an uncorrelated price. I'm not saying it isn't an option.
The beauty of having multiple angles is that they don't have the same errors. So by doing that, you mitigating errors in one specific technique. But I think we are making great progress on the GPS. I understand next year will be even more accurate for the driveways.
Very much so.
So I think we are moving in the right direction, and if we can reanalyze next year data, and maybe everything will fall into place.
The difference between your number and mine is the shared driveways, I think.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So my driveway is paid for by 2 people. I count it as 2 contracts, and Eric's counting it as 1. That's fine. So if you count everything that way, there's 68.
There you go. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah. There's 68 driveway contracts, including some networks that did not choose to renew.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to look at the result of your
Yeah.
analysis. Yeah.
And then the other thing that we do is then, for each driveway, if it looks weird, you can see the total list for 3 years, ordered by which ones were ignored, either because they're too high or too low. But I'm looking for, vehicles that were stuck or lots of drive-bys that lowered the average, things like that. So
Yeah.
I didn't have any better idea. It seemed,
I think
it seemed to make the data
since a
look
workable
rational.
hypothesis, I'd be happy to look at.
Okay.
I'll do a matrix after that.
Well, let's figure out.
Sounds
Yeah.
reasonable to me.
Okay.
Okay, everyone satisfied with the driveway portion?
Well, they're going to work it
Yeah,
out
I mean,
and come back with it.
from what they're going to do.
Yeah, and Eric and I, like I said, haven't had any time, and of course, there isn't a lot of time left now, so maybe Rick and I, or whoever you want to delegate with Bertrand, maybe we can try to find the data set that's representative and use it.
Or we can just approve the amounts in August as has been done historically before I got here. I mean, instead of rushing, maybe we just do it in August like it used to be done, and setting the contract amount.
For the driveways.
Instead of trying to set them in July.
That might be more realistic, but we'll see. I want to at least get the methodology understood.
Yeah.
Or then if we can.
I don't think anyone's, aside from you and Corey, is as deep in this as I am, and I can't delegate it to anyone at this point without a complete learning curve. So when I get back, we'll have to
Okay,
work
but
on it.
maybe we can.
Maybe you
team
guys
up.
can work on the methodology.
Maybe we can team up a little bit, because I'm just interested in your opinion whether this makes the data
better
feel, correlate.
Metric.
Yeah, okay. So we could maybe do that?
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
And then if you guys come to some algorithmic, formulaic
Yeah.
policy, then I can just apply it to the dollars and get the numbers.
Yeah. Let's see what we can
Yeah.
get before the next board meeting. Okay.
Good progress.
Yeah, it's my second favorite thing to do.
All right.
But
But-
we're getting there.
But I can't ski anymore, so my first favorite's gone. So, there we go.
That's leading edge technology for a reason.
So I think we're done on the snow removal budget item with that, so we'll move
Can I
on
just
to
ask a
item.
question? Bertrand, I know you're on the KMA board. Are you on the KMA board?
Yep.
Yeah. So I know that Nancy and Judy have always said that you needed this information like a month ago or 2 months ago, but East Meadows doesn't set its budget until, we're on a different cycle, I guess, but,
No, at this stage we made a budget and we'll see how it falls.
okay. You've got enough information.
We had to do it before our mailing package that to go 45 days before the end of the fiscal year, so this is out already, and we'll have to adjust.
Okay.
But once we work all this kink out, I think we're going to be able to be much more predictable and be able to output that earlier in the season so we can budget accordingly precisely.
Very good. With that, we'll move on to item 9, General Manager's Report.
Not a whole lot to say. Actually, we covered it already. Eastern Alpine Fire Department MOU is proceeding. Their board has given direction for their staff to work with us to come with an MOU for Eastern Alpine to provide a proposal to us for contract services. It would not be a consolidation or merger. It would simply be contract services through Eastern Alpine. There appears to be savings to the district of a substantive amount, which would help our property tax allocation. What that amount exactly is will depend on what their proposal looks like. So we've had multiple meetings with them, Eric and Rick and I, and Terry's been involved, and the other Terry Hughes, Chief Hughes, and CIO from the county, as well as their council, has been involved. They're working on their first draft proposal, and we will look at it from a big picture, and then we'll run it through various committees and through Shanahan as well.
So besides good public service to the community, what's their motivation? to provide this contract?
From their perspective, they have more depth of volunteers at that point. They have more volume of volunteers. That allows, one, our volunteers to come over and help them if they can now go on strike teams, which provides a revenue source to Eastern Alpine, which they can't do for dearth of volunteers. So there is a benefit to them as well.
Okay.
The one thing I'd like to do, and I'll just, do you have I unfortunately, I could probably dig it up. All the members of the ad hoc committee that we had a year ago, we met 3 or 4 times. Tony and Bruce, and to be honest, I can't remember who all were on it. But if you could just send me, because I would just like to send them an email. That's okay with everybody.
Absolutely.
Just to give them an update. That this is where we have ended up because of their early effort. Oh, Alan Sapp was on it. Thanks.
Any other questions on the MOU? If not, I think I already told you about where the wastewater plant sits on that. So we have our engineer. The plans are, as far as I'm concerned, ready to go. As soon as the board adopts the budget, we'll put them out to bid.
Good. Okay, Rick, operations report?
Sure. As you're aware, we're constantly getting ready for summer operations as soon as it actually shows up. And staff has been proactively going out and looking at issues as they expose themselves. An example is electric meters that are being twisted and bent and or broken. By the sheer amount of snow, the type of snow, the location of the meters. We're seeing things this year that we just never seen before. And as you drive through the valley, you can see decks, railings, roofs. There's all sorts of damage this year that, again, just haven't seen it before.
And I would just add to this, Rick, that is under a deck, protected under a deck that took that damage.
Yeah.
The snow creep. So as we're doing patrols this year, we're doing a complete soup to nuts patrol of all of our meters, water, propane cork stops, propane meters, electric, everything.
Fire hydrants, yeah.
Totally separate from the meters, though, because we're doing the meters all in one-stop shopping. But we're going to be reevaluating with a different eye what requires protection and what was previously satisfactory protection. Is it still satisfactory or not? And so we're having to look at that. So this was previously satisfactory, was not on our list. This volume of snow this year proved that that was not satisfactory.
Are we going to flow test fire hydrants also?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We do.
Yeah, and if we adopt the budget, which has a water model in it, all hydrants will have to be flow tested as part of the water modeling process.
Oh, okay.
And then just one more picture of example of a meter that's been in place for years. This year it's starting to pull off the wall. So
It's funny how there's enough clues you can guess the location.
It's in Kirkwood.
Yeah, there's one in Kirkwood. And then on a final note, we are preparing for the Kirkwood Summer Festival, which is coming up on July 6th. There are flyers here at the district, as well as it went out in a newsletter on the back of the newsletter article. Again, July 6th, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., and we'll once again have a silent auction that's pretty much sponsored by Cheryl Stern, and her personal goal is to raise up to $10,000 for the event. And the latest number of donations received by our very generous community is
Almost $17,000 just in donations, and a little over $2,300 in pre-registration tickets so far. So we're pretty happy with that.
So very excited about the event this year and look forward to great weather. So, and that's all I have.
Good, thank you, Rick. Moving on to item 11, standing committee reports. Planning committee.
We next meet on July 5th.
Okay. Operations.
Operations, Rick, we talked briefly about investigating the overhead line clearances. Have you had a chance to get down to Substation Green yet, as anyone?
The site tour is scheduled for next Friday.
Okay, just curious, yeah.
And,
There's enough snow melt so you can drive in there, or no? The hiking, or what?
As of last weekend, you could get about 3/4 of a mile past the dam.
Okay, that's it?
I don't know if you went any farther than that, probably not. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You saw some great cross-country opportunities.
If you like all sun-spotted snow, and, yeah, right.
We'll certainly bring back what we find when we get down there
Yeah,
to the next operations.
Because I know last year it never really took place, mainly because of the Forest Service, right?
Correct.
Change of rangers, and that's why
Timing.
I think there's a sense of urgency that we need to pursue it this year, especially with all the fires and the PG&E issues.
Yeah, we'll follow through the work plan, the timeline on when we can actually fall trees if we need
Okay.
to.
Okay, Finance Committee, anybody have anything we haven't covered?
Give me 1 second here. I don't think we went through the budget. We went through the snow removal. There were a handful of other things, but I don't think they were significant. Were they, Eric?
Well, you probably had the investment policy.
Well, we'd done that previously.
Yeah, okay.
We went.
GASB 75.
We went through the GASB 75 thing, which is the new $210,000 charge. We went through the resolutions that we already passed today.
And we will be going over another policy that Frank and Paul worked on next finance meeting, which is one of the last one remaining for adoption. And that'll hopefully be on the board agenda July or August.
Bob, IT?
The other thing we talked about at the IT meeting that we haven't covered is when customers go online to look at their meter reads, and it shows them hour by hour. The fact is that meters don't always report every hour in timely enough fashion. So if they haven't reported it within 24 hours of when it happened, we don't necessarily show it. The end result is that if you add up the sum of the meter reads that a customer would see and compare that to your bill, it might be less than the amount. The way we do billing is we measure the meter at a spot point every month, and that doesn't exactly correlate with the end of the month. It might be hours less. So some customers are getting severely misleading things. In winter, the buried water meters have a tough time shouting through the snow to a point where it can be collected. So they can go days or weeks without reporting. So we discussed, but we didn't decide, some way of trying to know. There's no inexpensive way of fixing that. So we didn't decide, but we want to do something so people aren't misled.
Some disclaimer.
Well,
That's easiest.
Yeah, we need. Well, I'd rather just say that there were 27 hours that were not reported. This might reflect, because we know how many empty slots there were. But anyway, that was one thing we talked about. The other thing I just briefly mentioned is to support the meter analysis. IT has written tools, so as they go out and do that, we'll have an accurate accounting of every meter, whether it required anything. And so at the end of the period, we can verify independently, all online, that every single meter was examined. And if they looked weird, we'll have photographs that we'll put into an annual album for the funniest meter of the year. And then there'll be big prizes for that as well.
Big prize.
Yeah.
Okay, the Personnel Committee met on May 30th. We reviewed ongoing changes to the handbook, and I think that will be brought to the board in July.
I think that'll be brought to the board in July or August. Yeah.
Also reviewed GASB 75 retiree benefits, the GM goals and objectives, and how we're progressing on those, which we, relative to personnel, I think we're on target on all of those. And that was it. Our next meeting will be July 25th.
July 5th. Did you write? Oh, you're sorry. I was thinking board meeting. He was on personnel. I'm already skipping ahead.
Right. Temporary advisory committees, I don't think we have that. General discussion, any of the board members have, you didn't bring up about Dick and
This week, our country kind of came together and for a change and agreed to honor the veterans on the 75th anniversary of the D-Day, basically. And with that regards, I thought it might be appropriate to honor Dick Reuter's memory because as an ex-board member, he actually participated in D-Day. Dick was he was an 18-year-old farm kid from Iowa when he enlisted, and he ended up on a ship, and he was directed to drive a bulldozer ashore on D-Day, and just the concept of that, taking a bulldozer in the midst of all that turmoil and Nazi snipers, and his superiors handed him a piece of tubing and said, "You can use this as a snorkel when and if the bulldozer goes underwater, so you can still operate it." And he did this. He performed this without killing the engine or killing himself. And they also advised him to keep his blade up in the air to deflect bullets, which they did. And I just thought that perhaps it might be appropriate to pass a resolution honoring him for his service, not only as a veteran, but as a board member. His long, I think it was 25 years that he was, and maybe we could present it to his family at sometime this summer, maybe the 4th of July.
I think it's a wonderful thought. And just if we have room in the newsletter, just a brief mention of that.
I think it would be appropriate. I mean,
I think it's a wonderful thought.
How many people do you know that actually were at D-Day?
Just my dad.
He's the only one. Oh, your dad was? Yeah. And he epitomized the generation.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, Jesse and I could maybe put something together.
Any other points of discussion?
Just a couple.
Sure.
Rick just forwarded to me what we got from PG&E, but they are doing a possible public safety power shutoff. Is pending today.
Today?
They're not showing Amador or Alpine counties. They are showing El Dorado. Any of you go into Napa, Solano, Yolo, or Butte, you're going to be out of luck. Placer County, Nevada County. So it's
But
mostly.
they're doing this as a training exercise. They get a suggestion.
No, it's a high. There's a high wind advisory. So anyway, just letting you know, for those of you who are traveling, I know Frank goes back to El Dorado County, so he may be without power, poor guy. But he's just stay in the valley, so you have power.
And to say those with those electric vehicles are.
Yeah, and then I did want to bring up, I can't tell you how appreciative staff was that the board did move the meeting to Friday for July, and they would similarly request similar consideration for Labor Day weekend as well, possibly doing a Friday meeting in September instead of on Sunday so they can have a bit of their weekend. So, since Monday is one of the 3 official holidays they get at the district.
Which day would that? Which day would that be?
Actually, August 30th. Friday before that was
Yeah. August 30th would be the Friday versus Sunday the 1st.
Same time as normal, 8.
I think we do 5 in the evening. Since everybody will be up for the chili cook-off anyway.
Gotcha.
That way people traveling, have time to get here.
Does anyone have a issue with moving that to the 30th? when we do it.
Staff will be very happy. Right, Jess?
Good. With that, we will adjourn the meeting, 11 o'clock.
Wow.
You're out of here.
I'm on the road.
Half a marathon.
Next meeting will be Friday, July 5th, 5 p.m.